Hi, everybody. This is Radio Free Mormon. That there is Bill Reel. This here is Mormonism Live, and good evening and welcome to you. How are you doing, Mr. Reel?
I'm doing exceptionally well. It's been a great week, and I think tonight's episode is going to be a blast. And I'm really excited for how you want to start this show off.
Well, thank you. It is July 8th. It is 2026 for the record. And I think it was today that it was released as a Facebook short over at Psych Ward Radio. This clip of Jacob Hansen going absolutely nuclear. I mean, you actually have to see this to believe it. Jacob Hansen, let's see if I can get this on the screen. Here we go. And I'll start it going. Jacob Hansen putting the psych in Psych Ward Radio. Let's see what he has to say.
Are people willing to die for this church anymore? How many people are willing to die for it?
Yeah.
As a percentage. Okay, let's say today it's 30%. But how many was it in the pioneer era? It was like 90%. If you start to take your core membership and actually give them something to really believe in and be united around, you'll get something. And here's the thing, we're not united. We're incredibly divided because we've lost our sense of who we are as Latter-day Saints. You have such a wide variety of, we talk about diversity as though it's a strength. Let me tell you something. Ideological diversity is a cancer. And in the church, we have ideological diversity to where you go everywhere, you have people cheering for Charlie Bird, who is literally with his gay partner, purchasing a child because they want to be parents. They're going to have a baby created through in vitro fertilization of another woman, and they're going to deprive a child of its mother. And there are active, faithful Latter-day Saints cheering for Charlie Bird and his partner as they deny a child their mother. And we are divided on that issue as Latter-day Saints. Me bringing this up is controversial. Are you kidding me? Are people willing to die for this church anymore?
I'm sorry. This is so funny on so many levels. The best funny part are the looks that Carden keeps giving, because it's like, I think this is probably smart, but I'm not sure.
I see Carden rolling his eyes as if he knows Jacob Hansen as being the village idiot, which is, to be honest, saying a lot.
Yes, when the village idiot thinks you're the village idiot, you've got a problem, Jacob. So what else did you think about that?
Well, I'll just tell you this. When you think people should die for your religion, you might be in a cult. I think you might be. It might be a little bit extreme. I don't think the Methodists, the Universalists, the Baptists down the street, the Presbyterians, the Pentecostals, the Calvinists, I don't think any of them are, the Amish maybe. Are they going to throw the towel in for their religion? I don't know.
I don't know. I think Jacob is just upset that the cult factor of Mormonism is down to 30%.
And I think that's basically what he's saying, is that the fanaticism in Mormonism is no longer what it used to be. And he wishes it was higher.
He's bringing it back.
Yeah. Wow. Way to go, Jacob Hansen.
Yes. Keep it up. And now even if they take it down, that is preserved. All right. So tonight's show is going to be really, really exciting, I think, because I've been doing some research on this. This is one of those subjects that I've had on the back burner for at least a year, and remembered it in time to bring it out and dust it off. Now, we talked in a prior episode. Let me see if I can put this slide up here, Bill. This is called Book of Mormon Breakdown. We're going to break down the Book of Mormon and even the words and phrases in it tonight. And as a result, yeah, it's going to suffer a breakdown of its own. There's the slide, and here is the first thing that we're going to talk about, okay? Because Richard Bushman, yes, that Richard Bushman, who in 2005 published the very famous biography of Joseph Smith, Rough Stone Rolling, a young up-and-coming podcaster named Bill Reel had Richard Bushman on his show, and I think this was back in 2015. And he asked him a number of questions, but in response to these very good questions that this up and coming podcaster asked, Richard Bushman said something for the record books, and it has been quoted since in other places. But this is the actual recording, the audio of Richard Bushman saying this and being asked by Bill. Bill, is there anything you want to say about this?
No, I was really excited to interview him, and I think he said a lot of things in those conversations. He was very forward, and this soundbite was one of many, but I think it was the main soundbite of the entire interview.
Yeah, it was a great one. So basically, yeah, he's going to really give a huge nod to the fact that the Book of Mormon is obviously a product of the 19th century, even down to the words and phrases it uses.
I love that. Thank you. The next one I wanted to tackle, it's kind of a subset of this, which is the Book of Mormon and the idea that we also bear witness to the Book of Mormon being true. Recently on a Ask Me Anything thing you participated in on Reddit, which is an online discussion board where people can kind of jump in and ask any kind of question, you made a statement on there that I had never heard you talk about before, which was this idea that we're going to have to come to grips with the Book of Mormon having a little more perhaps 19th century phraseology, 19th century ideas, 19th century concepts in it that and I don't want to pick on, say, apologists, for instance, but that some apologists are kind of hesitant to really acknowledge. It seems like you've gone a step further and said, look, some of this stuff's in there, and we're going to have to come to grips with the Book of Mormon being maybe something a little different than the idea or the cultural paradigm that we've placed it in. Could you speak a little more to that of maybe what, in your mind, how you reconcile this idea that the Book of Mormon is this historical work that really does, at least in some level, take place a long, long time ago, and we are dealing with Nephites and Lamanites, but also in the same regard, we also find bits and parts of Joseph within its pages?
Well, yes, I do believe that. I think right now the Book of Mormon is a puzzle for us. Even people who believe it heartily in every detail, it's a puzzle. And to begin with, we've got the puzzle of translation. Translating the book without the plates even in sight, they're wrapped up in a cloth on the table. It's not something that comes right off the pages, the characters on the plates, so we don't know how that works. And then there is the fact that, there's phrasing everywhere, long phrases that if you Google them, you'll find them in 19th century writings. The theology of the Book of Mormon is very much 19th century theology, and it reads like a 19th century understanding of the Hebrew Bible as an Old Testament. That is, it has Christ in it, the way Protestants saw Christ everywhere in the Old Testament. That's why we now call it Hebrew Bible, because the Jews never saw it quite that way. So these are all problems we have to deal with. On the other hand, there are things.
Okay, then he's going to segue definitely into Blake Ostler's ridiculous expansion theory or whatever the heck it's called. However, what do you think of that? And what did you think of it, if I can ask, while he was saying it and you're listening to it and you're getting this down on the record?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of maybe the beginning to middle of my faith crisis, right? 2015, I started the podcast in 2012. I knew some of the problems, knew a lot of them. I'm deconstructing, and by 2015, I'm pretty sure the church isn't true. I sit down with Bushman. Again, I don't know if the year on this is 2015, but I know that when I sit down with Bushman, I'm already aware in my head that a lot of things don't add up, but I'm hoping to frame things in a faithful way, which I did, continually in the beginning. I ask him the question, and I'm just hoping that, because I knew he had posted something in the Ask Me Anything about there being 19th century material in the book. And so I was just trying to frame the question in such a way that he saw me as the faithful interviewer. I'm acknowledging the complexity of the Book of Mormon and asking him to comment on it. And he just went so much further than I thought he was going to go. he essentially is telling you, he's telling anyone willing to listen, as a historian of Mormonism, as a scholar of Mormonism, all his life, that that this is a 19th century product at best, in part, at worst, entirely.
Yeah.
And if it is at best in part, one needs to figure out how that really works, because it's very absurd and irrational to try to make an argument that it's some ancient and some Joseph Smith's milieu.
I double checked. You released it at least on November 21st, 2015.
Yeah.
Which
By
is
the
the
way,
same month and
yeah.
right after the policy of exclusion got leaked.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that. It would have been recorded right around the same time. I might have had it sitting in the queue for a couple of weeks, but I wouldn't have let Bushman sit around too long.
Yeah.
And I remember the 2015 policy happening, and at that point, I knew the church wasn't true, but I was hoping it could be good. And the policy ensured that it wasn't good either. And so in my head, I was wrestling sort of right at the very end of my faith crisis and making a decision to step away from any form of belief at all.
Yeah. All right. So Richard Bushman, thanks to that great question that you asked, Bill, came up and coughed up this wonderful answer. And he talks about Googling, putting in phrases and terms from the Book of Mormon, Googling them and finding them in the religious and secular discourse of Joseph Smith's day. Now, that's all he says about it there. But I'll take that one down, and I'm going to put this one up, because before we get there, I want to mention that a few weeks ago, we had an episode in which we showed 34 examples of religious disputes and controversies in Joseph Smith's day that the Book of Mormon gives an answer to, showing that when Alexander Campbell wrote that the Book of Mormon resolves all the controversies of the day, he wasn't just whistling Dixie. Yes, it actually does. We documented that thoroughly. What we're going to show tonight is that not only does the Book of Mormon address all the religious issues of Joseph Smith's day, but it uses the same religious terminology in order to address them.
Yeah, we're going to, an RFM, put all of this together. I think he did a beautiful job. He's going to show you, we're going to talk about tonight the very thing Bushman is pointing to, phrases, long phrases, that if you look, they belong in 19th century. It is the theology of the Book of Mormon. Bushman notes is 19th century theology, and you're going to see those phrases, maybe some of those long phrases tonight.
Yeah, so what I want to do is I want to share this screen first off to give, let me see, I'll take this one down, put this other one up. I want to give credit to the person who posted this, although they do it by the pseudonym. This is at Wheat and Tares, that blog. And this was from 2017, so almost 10 years ago. But it's an article titled 19th Century Protestant Phrases in the Book of Mormon. It was November 8th, 2017. The guest poster is called Church is True. And I was talking with Bill about this prior to the show, and he thinks he knows who Church is True. I would only want you to mention the name if that person has, come out voluntarily.
Oh, they have. This gentleman was originally posting under the name of Randall Bowen, and
Yes.
forever we thought that was his name. He was essentially like active in the church, believed it at least to some degree, knew the problems were real and validated those, but and disagreed with apologists who play apologetic games, but wanted to do things from the inside of the church. People would say that he was maybe at the time he was doing things like this, he was behaving in ways that I did back again in 2012, 2013,
Yes.
2014. Eventually, Randall Bowen came forward and said, my real name's not Randall Bowen, it's Rob Terry. And I don't think Rob Terry is active in the church anymore, but I don't know that for sure. And so if anybody knows him, we'd appreciate an up-to-date sort of where he's at. But
Yeah.
he is, I'm 100% sure he is the author of this blog post.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure he gets the credit for it because I thought it was very, very interesting. It's going to form the basis of our investigation tonight. Now, he begins by saying the Book of Mormon contains a lot of unique sounding Protestant doctrine, language, and phraseology coming from Joseph Smith's day of the 19th century. This is from a believing member of the church. Now, he has an unusual view of the Book of Mormon, obviously, by this point, that it's not historical, but it's doctrinally correct, I think would be the best thumbnail for his position on it, as I understand from this article. But then he goes and he quotes Richard Bushman from Bill's podcast episode. And there it is. So it's the exact same thing we just heard. All right. Including, and then there's the fact that there's phrasing everywhere, long phrases that if you Google them, you'll find them in 19th century writings. Okay. So here's what I want to make clear. I'm not going to go through this entire article. I want to give you the idea as to what this article is about. And he's going to talk a little bit about his own model of how this can all be true. And there can be all these 19th century elements in the Book of Mormon, and it still be true in some obscure way that he's come up with, right? But the first thing he mentions is Google Advanced Book Search. All right. He's going to give a list because he's done the groundwork. And the list has to do with different words and expressions that are found in the Book of Mormon that are not found in the Bible. And when he says that, he means exactly and spelled the same way. All right. But he's made a significant list. And I think it's over 1,000 different kinds of things, different kinds of words. We're going to talk about that one here in a second. That's an example. Okay. And that goes on with the example. But here it is. All right. Then there is that Google book search, right? What you do is you take one of these phrases or words and you put it in the Google book search, advanced book search. You set it for before 1830 and you hit enter and see if that phrase or word comes up and in what context with all the books that are on Google Books. So that is the idea. Now, he makes it clear in his article that he is not saying that all of the words on his list are found in publications prior to 1830. This is an experiment that he gives to the reader and one I took him up on. Are you trying to say something, Bill?
No, not at all.
Okay, I heard you saying something. Sorry, I'm looking at the screen okay. Anyway, it's really, really interesting. So all he's saying is that these are the phrases that he's come up with that do occur in the Book of Mormon that do not occur in the King James Version of the Bible, one that Joseph Smith would have had access to. All right. And then it's up to us to use this in order to find out whether it does show up in publications prior to 1830. So now the other thing I want to show you on this is these lists, all right? He actually bears his testimony here in case some people think that he doesn't believe the Book of Mormon is scripture. All right. Here we go. Here's the list. Now, he has a list that is broken up into 4 different parts. There are words that are unique to the Book of Mormon vis-a-vis the King James Version of the Bible. Then there are 2-word phrases, and there's a list of those. And then there's 3-word phrases, and there's a list of those. And there's 4-word phrases, and there's a list of those. All right. So he calls them grams, 1 grams. That's the words. Spotless, restoration, happiness, plan, forever, consigned, etc. And this is going to go on. And all of these, according to his research, are words, those were words that occur in the Book of Mormon that do not occur in the King James Version of the Bible. Now there's 2 grams, right? 2 words: natural fruit, temporal death, spiritual death, seed forever, redeeming love, carnal state, going on and on and on. It is very, very long list. As I say, he estimates it or counted it at over 1,000. Now there's 3 grams. He calls them 3 grams, and those are 3 words in an expression. plan of redemption, chains of hell, the mortal body, demands of justice, and so on. And you can see that goes on really for quite a long way as well. Very, very long. So 3 words in a row occurring in the Book of Mormon that do not occur in the King James Version of the Bible. All right. So still going on. Availeth you nothing. Mercy claimeth thee. Sendeth an invitation. All right. Still going on. Amazing how many there are. Okay. We're going to get to the 4, and that's his last grouping. He doesn't go beyond the 4. So he says he could. Good heavens. We're still in the 3 words. Okay, I think it is over 1,000. And here's the 4-word sequences. Can in no wise inherit the kingdom. I think they're taking pieces from both temporally and spiritually. Wicked and perverse generation, once again, 4-word sequences in order that occur in that order exactly in the Book of Mormon that do not occur in that order exactly in the King James Version of the Bible. And this continues. Amazingly long. Okay, now we finally get to the end of it. Okay, so that is that particular article. Do you have any questions about that article, Bill?
No, one thing we talked about before we went on today is just noting how strange that language is in the Book of Mormon, those 3-word, 4-word phrases, from the way that we speak in 2026 or 1985 for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole point. Again, not in the KJV. It's these sort of sets of strange phrases that we're not used to. And we're only, again, 1825 to 2025, 2026. So we're 200 years removed, and it's strange language to us. It's unfamiliar. I would only note if we were to go back 1,000 years or 2,000 years, are we really proposing that these phrases would be less strange as you go into tonight, searching these and seeing what we find? If we find these phrases to show up in the 19th century, like Bushman says, and they're strange to us, isn't it more reasonable that they would be extremely strange to Nephites and Lamanites from 600 BC to 421 AD, if that is in fact the language of the 19th century?
Indeed, I would think so. All right, are you ready? Okay, here we go. Now, there's a bit of repetition here, but that's only to set the rules down, okay? Once again, this is this article, 19th Century Protestant Phrases in the Book of Mormon by Churches True, Wheat and Tares, November 8th, 2017. The rules are simple. We use only words or phrases from the Book of Mormon. 2, those words or phrases must not be found in the King James Version Bible, or at least not spelled identically. And 3, we look for instances of independent sources using the same Book of Mormon words or phrases prior to 1830. Simple enough? Okay. I don't have to say why we're looking prior to 1830, do I? Well, I will anyway, because the Book of Mormon came off the press in 1830, so it couldn't have been influenced by these books prior to its after its publication. All right. Now, this is the actual web address. It's easy to find if you just Google Advanced Book Search. You can find it. You put in your search phrase from the Book of Mormon, the one that doesn't occur in the King James Version of the Bible, then put it in before 1830 is the publication date, and you get some interesting results. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the one that he did in his paper. This is number 1, by the way. 1. First, here is an experiment to try. Let's use demands of justice. All right. Demands of justice. Now, this is his term that he used in his paper to show it as an example and show how it works. Choose a random word or phrase from the list and try this at home. That's what he's saying in his paper. To find out how and how many times the word or phrase appears in the Book of Mormon, go to this website, which is not the church website, by the way. And you can find, he has all these websites on his blog article. So if you go there, you'll find the websites. This one is actually a very good search engine for the Book of Mormon. The one on the church website I have used before and not really been impressed with it. So here are the results. Demands of justice appears 4 times in the Book of Mormon. There's Mosiah 15:9, where you can talk about and satisfy the demands of justice. There's Alma 34, verse 16. And this is maybe the more common way we remember it. Thus, mercy can satisfy the demands of justice. We hear that a lot in the church. And encircles them in the arms of safety, while he that exercises no faith unto repentance is exposed to the whole law of the demands of justice. And then in Alma 42:15, the 4th time, it talks about appeasing the demands of justice. The plan of mercy appeases the demands of justice. Demands of justice not found in the King James Version of the Bible. Note that although these 3 verses represent 3 different persons speaking, Abinadi, Amulek, and Alma respectively, they all sound quite similar, and that's actually a comment that was made by Churches True. Next, we place the phrase demands of justice into the Google Advanced Book Search function. Set it for instances of the phrase before 1830, and here is what we get. Once again, this is also in the article. From Pilgrim's Progress, one of the most read books of the time period. Now, this says 1815 at the bottom. It's written by John Bunyan, 1815. That would have been, of course, an edition. I mean, this is much older than 1815, but it was continuously in publication. I think it has been ever since it came off the press, if I remember that correctly. It's a big deal. But Bill, can you read this? This is from Pilgrim's Progress, a well-known book in Joseph Smith's day, and see if it, not only does it use the expression demands of justice, but see if it doesn't use it in a similar way that the Book of Mormon uses it.
Wonderful indeed is the plan of redemption by our Lord Jesus Christ. For when sin had entered into the world and man was becoming guilty before the Lord, his just desert is 1 S, correct? Desert is 2.
No, that's desert is 2 S's.
Yeah, this is just 1. So I don't know what he's saying, but let's assume desert. And man was becoming guilty before the Lord. His just desert was everlasting banishment from the presence and glory of his maker, and all that is meant by the word death. Had the Almighty, according to strict justice, cut him off as a guilty rebel, where had been the glory of his mercy, and if he had of his clemency forgiven the offense and restored him to the state of favor, where had been the evidence of his justice, truth, and holiness, had he required of Adam an atonement for his sins, commensurate to the demands of justice that had been impossible for him to have offered, but in the gift of Christ, justice and mercy met together, righteousness and peace embraced each other.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
So it's not just a hyper-technical focus, at least in this instance, and you'll be able to judge all the instances that I adduce here as the show progresses. In this case, it's wonderful because it's not just this term that is shared with the Book of Mormon and Pilgrim's Progress, but it's also being used in a similar way conceptually. Not only that, there's another instance, not just the phrase in Pilgrim's Progress, it's actually the same teaching as in the Book of Mormon. Yes, that's the point I was just making. And here we have something written about the Pilgrim's Progress. Could you read this too, Bill? This is from Wikipedia. It's just about how famous this book is and how influential.
The Pilgrim's Progress from this world to that which is to come is a 1678 Christian allegory written by the English nonconformist preacher John Bunyan. It is commonly regarded as one of the most significant works of Protestant devotional literature and of wider early modern English literature. It has been translated into more than 200 languages and has never been out of print. The first North American edition was issued in 1681. It has also been cited as the first novel written in English, according to literary editor Robert McCrum. Quote, "There's no book in English apart from the Bible to equal Bunyan's masterpiece for the range of its readership or the influence on writers as diverse as William Hogarth, C.S. Lewis, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, Charles Dickens, Louisa May Alcott, George Bernard Shaw, William Thackeray, Charlotte Bronte, Mark Twain, John Steinbeck, and Enid Blyton, and perhaps Joseph Smith.
I added that last part because it looks like it could be, huh? All right.
Yeah. It seems like a small one. It's a nice little start. I hope you've got a few others.
There's a couple.
Okay.
Now, this also appears in the Methodist magazine from 1798. What was it? What was the church that Joseph Smith was an exhorter in again, Bill?
And the Methodist sect, and I felt some desire to be united with them.
It was the Methodist. That's
Methodist.
right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the Methodist magazine from 1798. Do you want to read this?
Yeah. For if sinners are justified, it is because Christ has died, who entering into the holy place, his blood speaketh better than things than the blood of Abel. Then he turneth aside the demands of justice for violated laws, and answereth by the plea of his sacrifice. For he died the just for the unjust to bring us to God.
Okay. So conceptually, once again, the same idea about the mercy provided by Jesus and the grace of his atonement, appeasing the demands of justice. So we don't have to, it turns it aside. All right. So that is the first example. Now, that is the one example that Church is True gives in his article. But the next one is going to be this. So what I'm going to do is, Bill, if you'll hang on just a second, what I'm going to do over here is I am going to go to the advanced book search. And I'll toggle back and forth between these. And I think I can do that. I'm going to get rid of, let me put this one over here. Okay. This will be just a little bit sort of like juggling. Okay. So there's the advanced book search. Now, if we can go to this one, number 2 is priestcraft. It's used around 10 times in the Book of Mormon. These are just a couple of examples. In Alma 112, you can see it's mentioned 3 times in the one verse alone. Priestcraft, priestcraft, priestcraft. And it talks about priestcraft as the practice of going around, pretending that you preach the gospel, but you do it for hire and for money, really, and for glory. No leaders of the Mormon church do that nowadays, thank goodness. In Alma 116, there's another expression about the spreading of priestcraft through the land. So if we take this down, and now we put up, I'm going to try and add this to the stage. There it is. There's the Google Books advanced search engine, and you can do this yourself at home. There's only one other thing I have to say, okay? And that is that I went through all of those different examples given in that paper by Church is True. I mean, I scanned them all. And what I was trying to do is I was trying to come up with examples that I could test myself in the advanced book search at Google Books to see if they did appear in publications prior to 1830. And the criterion I put on my search, because really the majority and even the vast majority of these words and phrases are words and phrases that are not that, unusual. In other words, I could envision Christian preachers using them or writing about them, and it really wouldn't be meaningful. I'm trying to look for things that are more Book of Mormon-y, if I can use that expression, based upon my familiarity with the Book of Mormon. I've read it over 20 and probably around 30 times. I'm very familiar with it. And I'm also very familiar with the Bible, King James Version. And so what I'm trying to do is make a good faith effort on my part to find expressions and words in those lists that are more, that would have more evidentiary value, I would think, if they showed up in publications before the Book of Mormon came off the press. So this reduced the number of words that I looked for considerably. That's one thing. Do you have anything you want to say about that part, Bill?
No, I say no, but then I always chime in. Yes, it would. There's ways to go about this that would be unfair to the church, and and there's ways to go about it that would make it really easy for an apologist or somebody to defend. And as you point out, you're trying to do a good faith effort where you take the phrases that seem really strange, unique, peculiar, and they show up in the Book of Mormon, of course, but they're not in the standard, say, uh, religious vernacular going back through time all the way. And you're trying to figure out, like, where were people saying this thing?
Yes, exactly. So I'm glad you did add that. Now, the other thing I want to say before I go further is this, is that out of all those that I tested, there were a half a dozen or so that did not show up. It could have been 6, it could have been 7, it could have been as many as 10, though I don't think so many, that I had plugged into the machine that did not show up in that order in anything before 1830 in the Google book search. If I had been writing a paper on it, and if I'd been thinking of it, I would have written down what expressions those were. I don't remember, but I did want to make sure that I made the record complete as far as I'm able to let everybody know that this is not every single one that I put in that shows up here. It is at least 2 to 1 against the ones that didn't, but I wanted to let you know that as well. Okay, so now we're ready to go finally? Good. We'll go down here and publication date, 1830. If we put 1830 in here, all right, then that means that's going to yield us every book before then. And what is it I'm looking for? With the exact phrase, priestcraft, right? So what I want is priestcraft. One word. And let's see, because that is a very Book of Mormon-y word. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to also increase the size of this. Okay, hopefully that will help some too. So we get an 1817 book called The History of British India. It doesn't sound like a religious book, but it talks about priestcraft in it. And you can open these up and it will show you the page. A priestcraft, he also says, limited by law. And you can see priestcraft being used throughout. There's another example of this that I want to get to that's further down the page, which is 1829. 1829 bill, the Calvinist magazine, talks about priestcraft in a very interesting way, I think. And here's what it says. Definition of priestcraft. Well, the Book of Mormon is anxious to define priestcraft too, which it does in at least one place. An infidel paper gives the following definition of the term priestcraft. And then it quotes from this, whatever this paper is. But here's the interesting part. Can you see the first line after the quote? We have all heard much about priestcraft of late. This is being published in 1829. Apparently, everybody in the area, at least that this is referring to, has been hearing about priestcraft. It's been the subject of a lot of discussion, hence this article and hence this comment in the article. What do you think about that, Bill?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So as we go through the night, I want people to pay attention to the years. And so this you show is 1829.
Mm-hmm.
And what this author is saying is that, hey, I'm writing about this word, I'm describing it to you, but hey, we've all been hearing a lot of this lately. And it's a word that outside of Mormonism, I've never heard. It is a unique word that the Book of Mormon chooses to use that is on some level being heard rampantly in Joseph Smith's day.
Absent the Book of Mormon, I don't think any of us would have heard of it either. It being the Book of Mormon that preserves it for us, right? So there's that. That's 1829. This is the history of British India. It has that same secular reference referred to above, but that's in addition. 1820. The Crimes of the Clergy by William Benbow, 1823. Talking about, that's William Benbow. Excuse me. What I want is this. The Scourge of Ireland, or the Protestant Hierarchy, developed from the handwriting of the bishops, containing blah, 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 in 1819, talk of the priestcraft of the ancient dynasties of France and Spain. Okay, there's priestcraft being used in this publication in 1819. It's like people already understand what it means and it's in common usage. So that was 1823. Here is another thing from 1823. This is the works of the Reverend Daniel Waterland. I'm not going to spend this much time. I really can't on everything. But here's another book. Now as to this compound word priestcraft. I take it to mean some fraud of priests. Okay? So showing that it is in common use in Joseph Smith's day, and it's an unusual word. It's kind of peculiar to the Book of Mormon, at least today, but when the Book of Mormon came off the press, it was not peculiar at all. It was in common usage.
RFM, there's another interesting thing. So somebody in the audience is saying there's a separate tool called Google Books Ngram Viewer. And if I can just show for just a second, I'll do this a few times
Yeah,
tonight.
go ahead.
But this shows you how prevalent the word or phrase is at various times.
That was in the article too.
Yeah, and I always want folks to notice that, again, we go back to like 1800, it's on this down slope down. We don't know what it is before that. Who knows? But at 1820, it is right hitting its peak in its usage. And so when you say like that previous source noted that we've all been hearing this term priestcraft of late, that's what that author meant, was that in 1820, priestcraft is being used as much as it's ever going to be used from 1800 to 2020. Anyway, that to me, that's certainly interesting.
So the fact then that it gets used 9 or 10 times in the Book of Mormon kind of fits.
Correct.
All right. It's almost like a fingerprint. Maybe not quite as many loops and whorls, but really. Okay, so we have that. Now, that was the second one. As I say, time is going to get away from us. But let's go ahead, and I want to go to the second one. Okay. Oh yeah, I forgot. I have this between each one. Put priestcraft in the Google Advanced Book Search and see what we find. Well, we saw what we found. I think it's pretty darn illuminating. Number 3 is infinite atonement. Now, this is something that people really, some people think that the usage of this in the Book of Mormon is unique to Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. It appears in 2 Nephi 9:7 as well as in Alma 34:12, where it talks about the first one, wherefore it must needs be an infinite atonement, save it should be an infinite atonement, this corruption could not put on incorruption. And that whole thing, right? So, infinite atonement. Put infinite atonement in the Google Advanced Book Search and see what we find. Now, this is in case I forgot what the heck I was doing. It's probably a good idea. I made each of those slides. So let's go here and we'll put in infinite atonement. Is that what we decided, Bill?
Infinite atonement.
Yeah. You can see I'd already used it before. It's filling in automatically.
And going forward, if you'll let me switch your screens for you, that'll let you go right to Google Books and start typing it in.
Okay. We'll get this down to a science before we're done. So, infinite atonement. Wait a 1828, The Christian Pioneer, Volume 2, page 281. It says the infinite atonement. It says that it required an infinite atonement. This argument, likewise, is a mere sophism. For first, was it by... Okay, look, I've read this before. I think it's a bit confusing, but I believe his argument is this, is that it was not an infinite atonement. This person is putting forward the argument that the atonement could not have been infinite, because if it was done by the divine nature, then God suffered, which is impossible to believe. And if it was done by the human nature, it could not have been infinite. So it was not an infinite atonement. That's why he says this argument that it required an infinite atonement, likewise, is a mere sophism. Okay, it's sophistry. It's false reasoning. So not only, and this is what's interesting to me about this one, not only is this unusual phrase found in religious writings before the Book of Mormon comes off the press. In fact, I think this was 1828. I can't remember exactly. We'll look it up in a bit. But But what it's showing us is that there was an argument going on in Joseph Smith's day about whether the atonement that Jesus Christ did was infinite. I would not have known this except for seeing this. And what that tells me then is that the Book of Mormon itself is taking the position and the argument that it is infinite. In other words, it's taking the position opposite the position in that tract that we just had up on the screen. And now when I read it, I see it more clearly. Wherefore, it must needs be. This is an argument. It must needs be an infinite atonement, save it should be an infinite atonement. This corruption could not put on in corruption. Wherefore, the first judgment which came upon man must needs have remained to an endless duration. This is an argument in favor of the position that the atonement was infinite. And now I can add this to the list of religious disputes going on in Joseph Smith's day that the Book of Mormon weighs in on and gives the answer to.
And I'll just say, prior to 1800, it looks like it was used a bunch at 1800 and before, because I can see that slope coming down at the beginning. But then there's this revitalized conversation happening right around 1820, where this phrase, infinite atonement, is being used at a higher saturation in the culture than any other time we have on the graph.
Wow. All right. Well, that I'll put this back up here only because I wanted you to see that was the Christian Pioneer, 1828, right when the Book of Mormon is going to be dictated or produced the following year and 2 years. Here's a free inquiry into the subject of offered grace by William Palmer, Baptist minister, 1828. Same year, different publication. But if sin is infinite in its nature, I ask, how could it be atoned for? Once again, the arguments. Certainly, there are a plurality of sins, and if one sin demands an infinite atonement cannot be more than sufficient for one sin. And if not, either there is but one sin atoned for, or else there is a plurality of atonements. I'm not here to weigh in on the merits of the argument, simply to show that the argument was ongoing right at the time the Book of Mormon came forth.
When people say that the Book of Mormon is trying to resolve the questions of Joseph Smith's day, this is exactly what we're talking about.
Yes. And one that had been lost, at least as far as I'm concerned, to history. I suppose you'd have to be some kind of expert on that time and the religion in order to know about that. The Theological Magazine from 1796 talks about the infinite atonement. You can see it there. The Christian Disciple and Theological Review, Volume 1, page 439, from 1819, talks about the infinite atonement. The Connecticut Evangelical Magazine, 1802, talks about the infinite atonement. I think that has to do with that huge bump in your graph that you showed earlier, Bill. The Connecticut Evangelical Magazine, A Spiritual Treasury for the Children of God, 1765, infinite atonement mentioned. It's all over the place. And it's also in the Book of Mormon. Maybe not that big a surprise. However, as I said, there are some people who think that is a really, really big deal. So we put infinite atonement in there. And Tad Collister. Yeah, he passed away not too long ago, rest his soul. But he was a big proponent of the Book of Mormon. And one of the things that he liked the most was this idea about the infinite atonement. It appears in a list of things that he talks about. I just have a clip. It has one thing in front of it and then this, which he unfortunately says is the first time that infinite atonement entered into the lexicon or was ever used. We've just seen that that's not the case. But this is how faith-promoting rumors are born, I suppose. So here's the clip. This is from, I think, 2016.
How did Joseph Smith know all these answers when the rest of the Christian world was so confused? because he received them by revelation from God as he translated the Book of Mormon. Second, what about Christ's atonement, the central doctrine of all Christianity? The clarity and expansiveness of this doctrine, as taught in the Book of Mormon, is beyond honest dispute. The Old and New Testament have some scattered doctrinal gems on the atonement, which we greatly appreciate and benefit from. But the Book of Mormon has numerous sermons, entire masterpieces on the subject. For example, 2 Nephi 2 is a mind-expanding sermon on the relationship between the fall and Christ's atonement. While the rest of the Christian world believes the fall was a step backward in man's progress, Lehi teaches us the truth, that the fall coupled with the atonement is a giant step forward. 2 Nephi 9 introduces for the first time the phrase an infinite atonement, revealing the expansiveness, scope, and depth of Christ's saving power.
For the first time. Did he say for the first time?
He said for the first time, as if he knew for sure. We just showed really simply that was not the case. In fact, it fits right in the 1820s in the religious discussions of the day.
It was.
I don't know what happened to RFM, so I'll give him a second to come back in here. He must have, there we go. What happened there, buddy?
Where'd you go?
I didn't know where you were.
This is what happens when there's too many damn things for me to click. I clicked the wrong thing, okay? That's what I did. I clicked the wrong thing. It's not the first time either. All right. So anyway, what I was doing was that was the infinite atonement. We saw that it was everywhere in all these publications prior to 1830, and that it wasn't really the first time that it was used when it was used by Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon. Okay.
Let me just note something here. You'll need to put your other screens back up because when you left, those disappeared as well. Somebody in the audience informed me that on this Ngram viewer, you can change the starting date. So I thought it was just 1800 to the modern moment. You can go back as far as 1500. Again, this is a phrase that isn't used today, and it isn't used in the 1600s or the 1500s. It is 1800 to 1850 when it is meeting sort of this high threshold of when this phrase is being discussed, but it doesn't start until about 1750, 1730 or so.
And we kind of saw that with the examples. You know, the question is whether this goes back to Nephi times.
Yeah.
Only if it goes back to Nephi times do we actually have a test that's worth doing.
Yeah. So if it happens to be at the 1800s and it's not after that or before that,
yes,
you're really gonna, I mean, again, if you're a believer out there, you're really gonna argue, but yes, Bill, if we went back to 600 BC to 421 AD in the Americas, then we would find it peaking again. Well, that's an assumption that has no rational basis for it. These unique phrases, as we go through the night, I'll keep showing these, just as you do. Quite an interesting thing I think you're onto here, RFM.
Well, Dan Vogel says, Bill just taught me a new toy, the Ngram viewer. I just looked up ignominious death, because that's, of course, in the Book of Mormon. And it says it was highly used in 1824. And I don't think it shows up in the Bible. So that would be another example to add to the list. We've got enough to get through that'll keep us here for another hour if I'm not careful. So let's see what we've got going on here on this slide. Oh, excuse me here. Okay, it's gone. Oh, and I also wanted to mention that this is another thing. This was another religious dispute in Joseph Smith's day that I didn't catch. There's so many, at least I made the point at the beginning. This is not exhaustive. We've got 34 examples, but I don't claim that this is exhaustive. I'm sure there are some that we're missing, and this is one, and so was that argument about whether the atonement was infinite that we already saw before. But this has to do with the fortunate fall of Adam and Eve, called the Felix Culpa. It has a name that goes back a long time because the idea has been around a long time. And this is another dispute among different Christian religions. So here's what this says. Actually, can you read this part, Bill? This is, by the way, written by a faithful Mormon, Daniel K. Judd. He's a professor at BYU at the time he wrote it. It's titled The Fortunate Fall of Adam and Eve. It was published in the book No Weapon Shall Prosper, and that was edited by, I can't read that from here, but that's okay. He's another LDS professor at BYU.
Space constraints limit an exhaustive review of teachings of those who have taught the doctrine of the fortunate fall, but it is clear that in addition to the doctrine of the fortunate fall being an integral part of Latter-day Saint theology, the teaching can also be clearly identified in both ancient and modern writings of those not of the Latter-day Saint faith. In addition to the sampling of theological writings we have briefly reviewed, the idea of the fortunate fall is found in such diverse places as the literary writings of John Milton, Paradise Lost, the teachings of mathematician and philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz in the music of the band the Felix Culpa.
You even named it, for crying out loud. They got a band name for everything. I know a band from like 20 years ago that was called Fanny Alger. Believe it or not. True story. But this is the Felix Culpa band. But John Milton, Paradise Lost, oh yeah, definitely predating. This has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. This argument about whether the fall was a good thing or a bad thing. And the basic ideas are one, that it's horrible, bad. It was totally not what God wanted. And the other one is not necessarily that this is what God wanted. So let me make that distinction, okay? It's not necessarily it's what God wanted, but like the crucifixion, God didn't want that, but he kind of needed it to happen for the plan to go forward. That the fall was kind of looked at like that too. It was a bad thing that happened that God used to his purposes, and his purposes may not have been fulfilled without it. And so that's the argument. So that's very, very similar to the entire chapter, the entire sermon, the blessing that Lehi gives to his son Jacob in 2 Nephi chapter 2, where it talks all about this opposition in all things, right? Okay, that it was a positive thing. Adam fell that men might be, and men are that they might have joy. And I bring this up here just to mention again that I did not put that on there. So that list of 34 should be up to 36 by now. It's amazing the number of religious disputes in Joseph Smith's day that the Book of Mormon gives a solid answer to, one way or the other. Number 4, high priesthood. This is mentioned many times in the Book of Mormon, particularly in Alma 13, and there's several examples of it there, 4 examples in those 3 verses. But high priest is certainly in the Bible. Aaron and his descendants, who were the oldest males, who were the high priests, right? But high priesthood is something that, at least according to this article, and I believe it's correct, is found in the Book of Mormon, but not in the Bible. So what are we going to do? We're going to put high priesthood in the Google search, right? Okay, I'll do this. High priesthood. Here we go. Now, is this showing up? Good. Thank you, Bill. Now, where this shows up is in one place primarily, and it's in Flavius Josephus. And of course, we know that Joseph Smith is very, very popular work. It was had by people all over the place back then. And at least at some point, it might have been in the 1830s, we know that Joseph Smith had a copy. Josephus, it might have been 1835 that we have that reference, in something written by Oliver Cowdery is what I'm remembering. However, very, very common. And he talks about the high priesthood of God in Flavius Josephus. Now, this particular edition was 1805. This one's 1806, but you can see how frequently it's published, right? The high priesthood of God. While everyone that is of another stock, though he were a king, can never obtain that high priesthood. Antiquities of the Jews, once again, this is also by Josephus, but it is in a different place. Talks about high priesthood and slew him at Berea. Let me see here. Menelaus of the high priesthood. Okay. And again, these are all from Josephus. Different versions, different editions, 1818. There is an early one from the works of the Reverend and Learned John Lightfoot. That's from 1684. That references the high priesthood right there. You can see it. It's even highlighted. Isn't this incredible? This advanced Google book search. And this is from, looks like it's from some kind of a play. I think it is. And this is a line from Aristobulus where he's talking about the high priesthood. Okay. Well, anyway, that's enough for that. Do you have any questions or comments about that, Bill?
No, I mean, I can put, again, really quick, just show that there were lots of peak moments in the 1500s, 1600s, but the 1820, 1825 was also a really serious peak for that phrase.
Where is the 1820 to 25 on this? I can't see the...
Right where my cursor is.
Is that the, just a little bit to the right of the middle?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. And these other instances, and we had one that was in the 1600s that we went to. Okay. So let's see about this.
Oops, sorry.
It's okay. Probationary state. Now, once again, this is me going through. Now we're to 2-word phrases, okay? Probationary state. That's something that's kind of Book of Mormon-y, if you know what I mean, as opposed to Bible. And it's sort of, it has this state where I think of it as more a phrase I would read in the Book of Mormon than anywhere else. I associate it with the Book of Mormon. Okay. So you got Alma 12:24 talks about a probationary state. Alma 42:10. This probationary state became a state for them to prepare. It became a preparatory state. By the way, preparatory state I'm going to look up later too. And Alma 42:13 mentions it again, talking about a probationary state. Yea, this preparatory state, he uses it almost synonymously. So if we go in here and we're going to put in probationary state, here's what we're going to do. Probationary state. And we come up with 1740, The Principles of Moral Philosophy by George Turnbull, LLD. And he's talking about, if we remember that as there must be different abilities, turns, and situations in every social state, to this being, so this being our probationary state, all the differences which now obtain must be considered as differences belonging to a probationary state. So he uses it twice there. Sermons on some of the first principles and doctrines of the, this is 1815. This is Nathaniel Emmons, Emmons. And he's talking about, though in consequence of their justification, their probationary state is materially altered, yet it is by no means terminated. He's talking about, my gosh, it appears from what has been said concerning the character and justification of believers that they are still in a state of probation. It's a probation, though it's a probationary state, is what he's talking about. So this is 1815, and this looks like a use of probationary state prior to the Book of Mormon's usage of it in a way that is conceptually similar, if not identical, to the way the Book of Mormon is using it. Do you see that, Bill?
Yes. And not only that, it is only being talked about. This phrase is only being used in literature from 1800 to just before 1900, with the peaks being 1817 to 1826. That's a strange thing. I mean, that's an anomaly that one would need to explain. And I can tell you right now what the most rational, logical explanation for that is. And I think most of you can guess.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bill. I mean, that really drives the point home, doesn't it? Here you go. Yeah. Jesus, take the wheel. So that's probationary state. We put it in the Google search and we saw what it was. Let's look at number 6, punishment affixed. Okay. So not the affixed punishment, but the punishment affixed, which sounds kind of legalistic. Alma 42, this occurs in verse 18 and 22. Says, now there was a punishment affixed and a just law given, which brought remorse of conscience unto man. It's the punishment that's affixed to the end of the law. But if you break the law, then you're going to get the punishment that's affixed to the law that was broken. So that's the idea here. Now we're going to do what it advises. We'll put this punishment affixed into, let me see here. I'll go back to where it is, and I'm going to put in punishment affixed. Is that showing on the screen, Bill?
It is.
Thank you. So there's punishment affixed. Okay, this does show up. Here's 1812. It's the opinions of different authors upon the punishment of death. So this is a capital punishment argument. And it's talking about the punishment affixed. Interesting, because the Book of Mormon uses it in a very legalistic term too. So here it's talking about such a gradual scale of punishment affixed to all gradations of guilt, as may in time supersede the necessity of capital punishment, except for very atrocious crimes. So it's using it in the exact same way, the same sense as the Book of Mormon is using it. And where was this? This was 1812. The opinions of different authors upon the punishment of death by Basil Montague. That's not the only place. The Annual Register of World Events from 1822 talks about punishment affixed. Oh, there it is. Now, what was the punishment affixed to the perpetration of this crime? This is a common expression that's being used talking about the penalty that you have to pay. Don't do the time if you can't do the crime, right? And, I'm going to just show that that it's pretty common. This is the same site, this one. The Trial of Joseph Gerard, delegate from the London, something. This is 1794, punishment affixed. I think that's a similar one that we had before. The Mirror of Amusement from 1812 talks about the punishment affixed to dissimilar degrees of guilt. Cobbett's Complete Collection of State Trials, the punishment affixed, 1809. North Carolina Reports. So this is a report of an actual case. So it's probably on appeal. Punishment affixed to manslaughter. I'm really, really anxious to find out how this goes with the graphs that you're coming up with, Bill.
So you end up here. The highest point it's used is 1781, but it has this sort of peaking starting around 1749, 1781. But then you have this other. It goes back down to not really being used much, and then it's back up again in 1819, 1820. Strangely enough. Punishment affixed. And then again, you go back to the 1700s, 1600s, 1500s. It's just not used at all. You go to 1950, 2000. It's not used at all. It's this brief moment in time where this phrase is making its rounds in the culture of Joseph Smith's day.
Really interesting. I think we're also effectively disproving the ghost committee theory from the early modern English period.
If it's okay, RFM, I think actually now is probably a great moment to jump in and say something else, which is I can already hear apologists going like, of course it's in Joseph Smith's language of his day. He's the translator. This is, if we just apply a loose translation method, then Joseph Smith gets to pick whatever words in his culture represent what these sources are saying can absolutely be the words that Joseph Smith uses. And let me just make my screen bigger and I'll add it to the slideshow. The reason we can't do that, I'll just put here, apologists will want to get away from this by utilizing a loose translation model. Under a loose translation model or the expansion theory by Blake Ostler, Joseph could have just channeled the religious vibe of the burned over district into his translation. But that doesn't hold up against the Book of Mormon translation eyewitness accounts. The scribes and witnesses include Emma, Martin Harris, the Whitmers, Cowdery, and they describe a tight translation process. Joseph dictating word for word, approximately 20 words at a time, with a brief stop to ensure words are spelled correctly, then on to the next segment of words. D&C 10, which is about the lost 116 pages, reinforces this with God's voice explaining that God could easily have Smith retranslate that portion if it were not for those bad actors who stood ready to alter those first 116 pages. In other words, God is telling the audience, Joseph can go ahead and replicate this perfectly because I'm telling him the words. I'm not the problem. Joseph's not the problem. if he does create an exact replica, the problem is there are bad actors out there who will bring forward an altered text. Such frames the Book of Mormon as a precise, preserved record where specific words and phrases matter, not a loose paraphrase where God lets Joseph freestyle. Apologists wish they could wave it away as 19th century vernacular in the translation, but that concedes the game. If it's tight, those exact phrases shouldn't be there unless Nephites spoke like the 1820s Methodist and Calvinists, which undercuts the ancient record claim entirely. It's not just vocabulary bleed, it's the doctrinal fingerprint of Joseph's environment delivered in the way that demands precision. And I'll just note here on the next slide, these are just 3 examples that we find. Emma Smith said he dictated each sentence word for word. When he came to proper names he could not pronounce or long words, he spelled them out. Is Joseph choosing the words or is God choosing the words, right? And while I was writing them, if I made a mistake in spelling, he would stop me and correct my spelling, although it was impossible for him to see how I was writing them down at the time.
And that's how it is that the Book of Mormon came out in the first edition with no spelling errors, Bill.
Yeah, there it is. Right. It had a few. Martin Harris says sentences would appear and were read by the prophet and written by Martin. Again, this is a secondhand statement where Martin was talking to somebody and they're reporting it. Written by Martin. And when finished, he would say written. And if correctly written, that sentence would disappear and another appear in its place. But if not written correctly, it remained until corrected so that the translation was just as it was engraven on the plates, precisely in the language then used. That's interesting. By the way, Emma and Martin describe a very similar process. At what point do we trust the people who were involved with the translation to have a clue when they're all overlapping each other in their descriptions? David Whitmer says, a piece of something resembling parchment would appear, and on that appeared writing. By the way, that might be a hat tip, no pun intended, to what's in the hat, by the way. That might be sort of Joseph telling the truth. A piece of something resembling parchment would appear, and on that appeared writing. One character at a time would appear, and under it was the interpretation in English. When it was written down and repeated to Brother Joseph to see if it was correct, then it would disappear, and another character with the interpretation would appear. In other words, yes, if you need to still believe, you can go grab the loose translation model. You can hinge on to Blake Ostler's expansion theory, and you can do that. But the data is telling you that the most reasonable explanation is that everyone involved in the Book of Mormon translation who spoke about the translation process sound very similar to each other. They're describing a tight translation. God himself in D&C 10 describes a tight translation. And strangely, the language that the Nephites and Lamanites use on the gold plates seems to not only be modern English, which we expect, Joseph's a translator, but it's the very theological and secular phrases that are being trounced around in the 1820s, and for the most part, not at any other time. And I would expect, I haven't done this, this Ngrams website. This was new today. The one you pointed out to me, but also the one that somebody in the audience pointed out to us.
It was Asti Destry.
And my hunch is that the person in the chat there you just mentioned, as we go forward, I bet over and over and over again, we will see this be the specific, interesting, unique terms of the 1820s.
Mm. Yes. Well, the thing that makes this, first off, not only are you right, boy, are you right, because it's not just that Joseph Smith conceived of the Book of Mormon as a word-for-word translation, tight as you can possibly be, but the entire setup and procedure is designed in such a way that God is making sure that no variation can creep into the language. It has to be repeated word for word exactly, and according to him, even spelled correctly sometimes. um, before that phrase will disappear and a new character will appear and a new phrase.
Yeah. And I'll say one more thing. Oh, I forget what it was.
Was it about the fact that even there, they're talking about every
Oh, no.
character representing 20 to 30 words?
No, I remember what it is. Yeah, by the way, yes, but I remember what it is. It's that the loose translation model only got invented when we as Mormons in 1830, the Book of Mormon gets published. We're listening to the witnesses describe the translation. We listen to Orson Pratt, who goes around and gathers firsthand and secondhand accounts about the translation process. And we read all of that and we go, tight translation. There's no if, ands, or buts. It's only when we go, oh, a tight translation's a problem. We need to have a loose translation in order to explain contradictions that are coming in from people who are critiquing the Book of Mormon and criticizing the translation process and criticizing Joseph Smith. Notice when apologetic tools get invented, they're often in response to the orthodox answer being deconstructed.
Yeah, I'd even go further and say always, even though it's inadvisable to say always, I'll venture it here. I think that it was in the latter part of the 19th century, and B.H. Roberts realized that we need a little bit more elasticity in the Book of Mormon in order to defend it. Can you say horses, boys and girls? I knew you could.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need a little bit more elasticity in the translation on horses and a host of other anachronisms. And that's just for starters. So that's how the loose translation theory was born. It was born of necessity and not because of any evidence that supported it.
Yeah, it's how moving the hill Cumorah got invented. It's how the catalyst theory got invented. You just gave an example. It's what we do as Mormons when our faith runs into problems. We invent other kinds of answers that are also untenable, but they solve this immediate problem as long as we take it one issue at a time.
Yes, very good. All right, so we did punishment affixed. Did you have anything else you wanted to say before we proceeded with the slides? Okay, number 7 is preparatory state. I told you we were going to do that again. So that appears in Alma 12 and also in Alma 42, and it occurs like 3 times. And I'm not saying these are all the times that I get out of the Book of Mormon. They may be, they may not be. These are just representative to show you that it does occur in the Book of Mormon, and according to Church is True, and I believe it doesn't occur in the King James Version of the Bible. Let's put preparatory state in the Google Advanced Book search, and let's see if you can get that on the screen. Punishment affixed was interesting. This is preparatory state, though, right, Bill?
Preparatory state.
All right, here we go. Hey, guess what? Preparatory state occurs in a publication 1818, a complete collection of state trials and proceedings. So this is not religious. This is secular. It's an expression that's used outside a strictly religious context. You're talking about what were the proceedings in the society as far as came to your knowledge? Prepare. Oh, this is a false. This is a false positive. Look at this. See, preparatory. This is double columned, and preparatory occurs at the end of one column, and state occurs on the other side of the line. False positive. Glad we looked that one up. This is from 1789. Did that make sense? What I was saying? Why I was saying that was a false positive, Bill?
On 2 different pages. So preparatory happens to be next to state, but they're in 2 different sections of the book.
Exactly. So let's check here. The monthly review. This was 17-something, 89. This is on the same page. Adam, instead of the easy culture of Eden, which had been pleasing employment of his preparatory state, was to be occupied in more arduous labors. Okay. That's 1789, Ralph Griffith's monthly review. Here's the monthly review of literary. I think this is the same one, 1789. This one's the same one. Same one. This is different. This is from 1740, George Turnbull, talking about a preparatory state. It is therefore absurd to object against the differences which take place in our present state in whatever view we consider it, whether by itself abstractly from the future state to which it is a prelude, or as it is a first and preparatory state with regard to a future one. That is using it in the same way that the Book of Mormon uses it. And that was from 1740, 80 years prior. I think this is the same one. The Complete Farmer, or a General Dictionary of Husbandry. That would be a secular use of 1807, preparatory state. Same one. Reflections on the Public Ministry of Christ from 1821. I'm sorry, Bill?
Just saying the year on that one is interesting. I'm just noting when they're used in ways that I'm like, oh, that really isn't a religious connotation, or it is. And the ones that are, when they coincide with the early 1820s, I find that quite interesting.
So here's 1821. When death has purged our sight and enlarged our sphere of observation, when the great year of God's government has gone round, when every principle of this preparatory state has put forth all its influences. There it is. It was in usage prior to the Book of Mormon coming forth. This is the same decade. This is 1821, I believe it was. Let's see. Yeah, 1821, Reflections on the Public Ministry of Christ.
And this one takes off just before 1800, has its peak sort of 1819 to 1835, and then it dies off, hardly used again.
Wow. By the way, I think that I'm not sure I said this. I wanted to say it, that the argument about the loose translation, it doesn't carry any water in the very first instance, but to the extent that anybody wants to believe it does, I think that the instances where these technical terms get used in the Book of Mormon in the same way and arguing the same issues as are being argued in Joseph Smith's day, make that connection so strong that whenever we see any other instances of it, I think it's reasonable to look at those as further instances of the same thing, i.e. the Book of Mormon just using terms that are in Joseph Smith's day without Joseph Smith being the one who's, using them himself or putting them into his own words.
Yeah, and this adds, again, I said this earlier, but to reiterate it, this adds so much more weight to when the critic raises their hand and says, hey, do you guys notice that the Book of Mormon is trying to resolve every theological conundrum of the 1800s and some non-theological, whether Masonry is okay, for instance, whether the Masonic stuff is okay. But again, you pointed out the 34 from the one episode. By the time we're done tonight, we've already added 2, 3, 4 of them. We're going to have more. Essentially, Joseph sat down and said, how can I solve the 50 questions in my culture that I'd like to address?
And something else that occurred to me, we talked about why Jesus had to be baptized. That's an old issue. Why did Jesus have to be baptized if baptism is for the forgiveness of sins and Jesus had no sins? Book of Mormon can't resist. It's got to weigh in on it, right? For thus it actually asks the question, why it puts it in John's mouth, right? Why is it that I should baptize you? I should be baptized of you. And then I think this is in the Book of Mormon exclusively. Is it in the New Testament? We'll see. For thus it becometh us to fulfill all righteousness. And therefore that answer is given and taken in the Book of Mormon. Another one, which we know was a chestnut, and it still is today, is what's happening at the end of John. When, our belief that John, the beloved, never tasted of death, but was changed in the twinkling of an eye to a celestial, the whole thing, and he's still around, okay? Well, where else does that occur? In the Book of Mormon. Except instead of one disciple, it's going to be 3 of them, okay? Because the Book of Mormon outdoes the Bible every time. So there's 3 Nephites that go through the same experience that John does. Now, you have to understand, of course, and I think you know this, that at the time of Joseph Smith, this was a huge question. What does that mean? Does it mean that John would never taste of death, which is kind of incredible? I mean, what's he been up to all this time? And where can I find him? Versus it means something else, because it's a cryptic saying that Peter gives, right? And so this is another dispute in Joseph Smith's day that the Book of Mormon takes a position on vis-a-vis the twinkling of the 3 Nephites. And of course, it also came down during the translation of the Book of Mormon when the subject came up and they went out and got the revelation that says, hey, yeah, this is really what it means, is that John would not taste of death. Okay, yeah, it's all throughout. It's almost like every day Joseph Smith just said, okay, so what dispute am I going to take a position on today? He'd already been thinking about this since at least 1820, if we're to understand him correctly, about being 14 and being really interested in this and going from church to church. So that's been 9 years, so he's had a while. Okay, plain and precious. This is something that's very Book of Mormon-y. Wouldn't you agree, Bill?
Yeah, it's a plain and precious things. This is definitely a Book of Mormon term, and I've never heard it before outside of that.
So there's some examples from 1 Nephi 13 is where it shows up in abundance. And this is just illustrative. It shows up more times than this. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in those 3 verses there. The plain and precious things taken from the Bible, right? Which were restored through the Book of Mormon. Let's put plain and precious in the Wayback Machine. Let me see here. I'm going to go up here. All right, plain and precious. Ready? Oh, by the way, you'll also note that this is now 3. This is a 3-word phrase. Plain and precious. Up. Here it is. It does show up before the Book of Mormon. The Doctrine of Predestination unto Life by William Cooper, a minister in Boston, Massachusetts. What does he say? He says, let's see, but only of that which is the ground of them all, and from which the rest result, namely election or predestination into life, a plain and precious, but I'm so sorry, it's so hard for me to read this word because the F's are S's.
Disrelished?
Disrelished, and it's a weird word too. You got it, I think. A plain and precious, but disrelished and opposed truth of the gospel. So he says this is a plain and precious truth of the gospel. Exactly the way the Book of Mormon's using it. What do you think?
This one, when I go to see the frequency, it's not used in the 1600s and earlier, pops up once or twice in the 1700s, and then from about 1800 to the modern moment, it has a pretty equal amount of usage. So this one isn't as good of an example of what we're demonstrating as the others.
Okay, very good. Thank you. This is really helpful. So that's the doctrine of predestination, and it's talks about plain and precious. And yet it certainly is there. It's 1825 in this book by Charles Caleb Colton, Plain and Precious Truth, exactly the same way it's used in the Book of Mormon. Plain and Precious Meaning from 1744, The Christian Pioneer. 1816, Plain and Precious Truths. This was a common phrase. It was part of the lexicon in Joseph Smith's day, I think. And we all
He did it again. So there's that. I don't know what he's doing, but he has to knock it off.
I'm having a good time tonight, aren't you, Bill?
Whatever it is you're doing, you got to knock it off.
I hope everybody out there is having a good time. Okay, so where are we? We're getting close to 10. Let me see here. Plain and precious, that's it.
You'll need
So
to
what's
load up
next?
that screen when you get a second.
Bowels of mercy. I'm so sorry. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Bowels of mercy. Can you talk about the bowels of mercy there for a second, Bill?
Yeah, so bowels of mercy shows up. You've got 2 scriptures on the screen, Alma 26 and Alma 34. I'm going to type it here into that second program here, bowels of mercy, and we'll see what comes up. Yeah, interesting. So this one is a little strange from what you're showing, which is, oops.
I'm trying to get it on the screen.
Oh, yeah, right there.
There
Yep.
you go.
So it looks like it sort of peaks around 1650-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, that Joseph hearing things from the 1600s, 1700s is certainly more reasonable than this is the way that Nephites and Lamanites spoke. But this one I would say is not the greatest example either. By the time we get to 1800, 1820s, it's pretty low amount of usage.
Yes. And let me go ahead. I'll take this one off the screen, put this up, and I'll put the bowels of mercy in there so you can see what it is that you're also showing there. that it was in use in Joseph Smith's day. I put bowls of mercy. Bowels of mercy. Okay, let's see if we, nothing with bowls of mercy. Bowels of mercy we have. So bowels of mercy, 1650, going back as far as that. Jeremiah Burroughs, all talking about Jesus Christ. An exposition of the Epistle of St. Paul, that's 1637, 1775. The works of Robert Trail. Bowels of mercy, 1775, and so forth. So these all have to do. By the way, I don't think this is really that great an example for another reason. And that other reason is that when I did look this one up, I discovered that the King James Version in Colossians 3, verse 12, says bowels of mercies. Okay. So the King James Version does not have bowels of mercies. That does have bowels of mercies, but not bowels of mercy singular. The Book of Mormon has bowels of mercy singular. And apparently, I mean, it's obviously based upon this verse, right? And it became common to refer to it as singular bowels of mercy, at least singular as far as the mercies go. So I don't think this is that great an example, and I wanted to make sure that I put that on the record as well. Any comments from you about this word?
No, I agree with you. I think that's not as good of an example.
Okay, very good. Oh, yeah. So now that we're done with number 10, by the way, to let you know, no, we're not even to number 10 yet. Where did all the words come from is what Brian Hales is famous for asking. You know that, don't you, Bill?
Yeah, not only where do all the words come from, but the longer the sentence is, it means something too.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that Brian Hales is watching so that he will understand where did all the words come from. And a lot of them came from Joseph Smith's environment and from publications and discussions and sermons that were going on all around him. It was the Second Great Awakening. And here's a little video clip so we can stand and stretch and watch Brian Hales talk about where did all the words come from.
So our next speaker is going to be Brian Hales.
Ooh.
And Brian has published extensively on Joseph Smith and plural marriage. And he's currently working on a book-length manuscript exploring Joseph Smith's 1829 skills and those required to dictate a book like the Book of Mormon. He's a retired anesthesiologist, and with his wife, Janice, will be entering the MTC on October 28th as full-time missionaries assigned to the Utah Salt Lake City headquarters mission to work with Rick Turley on the new Joseph Smith biography. So we feel very lucky to have Brian with us today. Brian's spoken at several of our conferences, but we feel especially lucky because we caught him right before he went into the MTC for his mission. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Brian Hales.
I'm excited to be here today to talk about artificial intelligence and the skills that Joseph Smith exhibited while he was dictating the Book of Mormon. See if I can get these slides worth. I think everybody agrees that Joseph Smith dictated all of the words of the Book of Mormon, and most people agree it was in about a 3-month period. But if we ask the question, where did all of the words come from, we get different answers. Joseph Smith talked about a supernatural source by the gift and power of God. But of course, we understand most observers reject this, instead declaring that there was a naturalistic source.
Yeah, it's where all the words come from one's environment generally, and apparently this is no different.
It is where all the words come from is the 1820s.
You know what's interesting is that he gets called on a mission to help Richard Turley write a book.
Yeah, most people aren't getting that kind of a mission, huh?
What do you have to go to the MTC for that for?
Yeah, why does it have to be a mission? Why can't he just be hired to work for 2 years?
Because they need to be hired. I think he's not being hired by means of a mission.
By the way, they got him to pay to do this work for the church.
Mm-hmm. The church is no dummy, let me tell you.
I'm sure they bring him lunch every day at least.
Oh, I would hope so. I'm sure he might be just about out by now. I think that was October of 2024. It's usually 18 months. So April, I think he would have been out just
Well,
past April.
When he gets home, he's got some research to catch up on.
Yes, maybe he'll come on the show. Hopefully he's watching. Hi, Brian. All right, so that's Brian Hales, and we're trying to help him understand where the words came from. And we'll continue to do that even as we go on now. Now let's add this to the stage. Plan of happiness. That's a Book of Mormon phrase, isn't it? The plan of happiness. That's Alma 42, verses 8 and 16. We get two mentions of the plan of happiness. If we put, let me see here, plan of happiness. Once again, it's a 3-word phrase. Before 1830, what do we have? Oh, we have some instances. 1769, the Universal Magazine of Knowledge and Pleasure. Oh, it talks about the plan of happiness. This looks like it's sort of a secular kind of writing. This uncle was an earl. Yeah. The complete works of William Paley. This looks like a little bit more philosophical. This is 1825, by the way, Bill. Talks about it is impossible to propose any plan of happiness which will succeed to all, or any method of life which is universally eligible or practicable. So that's 1825. This is 1786. Edinburgh Magazine talks about the plan of happiness. The Principles of Moral and Political Philosophy from 1786 talk about the plan of happiness. I think this might be the same reference. Here's something from 1790, the plan of happiness. Apologies for Christianity and the Bible. Hang on a sec.
And see, I'll just say again, you get these other years, 1700 and something, but the moment it turns into a religious conversation, that was 1821.
I want to see this. Here, let me see this. Let me add this to the stage, okay? Holy Toledo.
Not said in after 1850, not said prior to 1750, hits its peak at 1775 and its last little peak at 1823 before it drops out of the vernacular of society.
That's amazing. Wow. All right, you ready? On the home stretch. I don't know if they're home stretch, but we're at least halfway through. Points of doctrine. Now, that's an interesting Book of Mormon expression, I think. Alma 41, verse 9, talks about points of doctrine, and Helaman 11 in 2 places talks about points of doctrine. So there's at least those 3 mentions in the Book of Mormon. Not very, I don't think very Bible-y. But if we put this into the advanced search, and we can see what's going to happen here, take this down, put up the advanced search, and we're going to put in, what are we going to put in, Bill? Do you remember?
Point of doctrine.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Points of doctrine. Okay. 18 lectures on important points of doctrine. The thing itself is labeled, it's titled Points of Doctrine by Charles Abel Moisey. 1823, Bill.
Those would be interesting if Joseph Smith read those, wouldn't they? I mean, again, if someone is trying to solve the religious conundrums of their day, they're going to be reading and thinking about who else is talking about this stuff.
Yeah, you would think so, wouldn't you?
The title,
there it is right there, 18 lectures on important points of doctrine and practice.
By the way, it's just an interesting topic. That's something, if it was tied to Mormonism in my days of being all in, this is something I would have read. This would have been something I would have gravitated towards.
Here's a vindication on some points of doctrine from 1746. So this has been around for at least 80 years prior to 1823 when it was published in that first one we read in the 1820s. 1746 is another instance. 1817 is another by Jean-Antoine Dubois. Description, what is this? But whatever may be the pretensions of the Brahmins, the Jainins, and the Buddhists concerning the antiquity of their religion and the various points of doctrine in which they disagree, using it exactly the same way as the Book of Mormon. Okay. So there's points of doctrine. Any comments about that?
Yeah, I'll just say it peaks. Oops, it shows up in there you go. Sorry, it shows up around 1550, has its biggest peak at 1605, but then it shows up again 1768, 1814 to 1826. It's got a little bump, and then it disappears into the shadows of history again.
Really interesting. I'm glad that you've got that. I'm glad OC Destry brought it up. All right, so that was 11. Let's look at 12. Plan of restoration. That's very Book of Mormon-y. Alma 41, verse 2. I say unto thee, my son, that the plan of restoration is requisite with the justice of God. All right. So plan of restoration, let's plug that in. See what happens, shall we? Plan of restoration. We got it. 1792, James Weaver, a universalist. Free thoughts on the universal restoration. Let's see. Thus, by the help of the glorious plan of restoration, we are able to harmonize every known attribute of the deity, and etc. He even capitalizes it, plan of restoration. When was this again? 1792. We've got one, a plan of restoration relating to apparently surgery from the Edinburgh Medical and Surgical Journal from 1805. So that's secular. The doctrine of general redemption considered. Plan of restoration, 1807. Walter Cellon, Sellon, talks about if by restoration no more be meant than providing sufficient means and unalterably fixing the plan of restoration. There it is, the plan of restoration. But to talk of restoration from eternity in any other sense is downright nonsense. Actually, as I said before, no man is restored till he has a being. So they're having arguments about this restoration as well as the Book of Mormon, where Alma's countering what he considers to be Corianton's false doctrine of restoration, and Alma's there to set him straight, if we recall. Here's one from 1824. Minister of the Northwest Church. This is in Glasgow. Let's see what he has to say. Plan of restoration. When we see how admirably the gospel plan of restoration is suited to the leading laws of the human constitution, and etc. The Methodist Magazine. Ooh, 1810. Methodism. It's there too. She constantly attended the means of grace and was well acquainted with the doctrine of the fall of man and the gospel plan of restoration to the favor and image of God through faith in the great mediator. What is your graph show, that Ingram graph?
Yeah, it shows the term was unused from 1500 to 1750-ish, and then suddenly it starts to pick up some traction, hits its peak at 1863, but had some usage in the early 1800s, 1820s, 1830s. But prior to 1770 or so, it's just not used at all. Zero.
Plan of restoration.
You get back to like 600 BC, then it peaks again.
A lot of people were talking about the plan of restoration, not just Joseph Smith. Okay, that's really interesting. I wonder if that 1863 has anything to do with the Civil War, but that's another subject. Let's see what we have next up. Racked with torment. I thought this was an interesting one. This is, of course, from Alma 36, where he's recounting his conversion experience to his son. In verse 17, where it talks about, and it came to pass that I was thus racked with torment while I was harrowed up by the memory of my many sins, and so forth. So let's see what happens when we put racked with torment into that Google search. Racked with torment. Yep, we got it. 1756, racked with torment. That's soul. How funny, because an F would be foul, but it's also soul. his soul filled with unutterable and inconceivable agony. So it's talking about the pains of hell, the pains of a damned soul, like the Book of Mormon is, racked with torment. Let's see. There it is. His body racked with torment. His soul filled with unutterable and inconceivable agony, and himself crying out like a man sorrowful and forlorn. All right. So that's 1756. 1818, we have one in an ecclesiastical biography. And I think this is more literal kind of way, racked with torment and some pursued to death with faggot and fire. Ecclesiastical biography or lives of eminent men, 1810. This is also that same quote, the racked with torment one from above. An extract from the report of the directors of Massachusetts, racked with torment. The Book of Martyrs. Now, this is a very, very popular book. It's kind of like up there with Pilgrim's Progress by John Fox. 1803 is just this particular publication. It goes, I'm sure it goes back way before that, but this is page 354, where it does talk about some racked with torment and some pursued to death. So, what do you have for us on your graph there, Bill?
It is a term that is not used at all until 1750. It has a little blip, probably the thing that you pointed to, shows back up in 1804, and then it has some usage until the modern moment. But again, you go behind 1750 and it's zero usage. 0.00000000.
Yeah, but back around in the 1st century BCE, I think it had a blip, if you could go back that far.
It did in the Americas. It did.
Okay. Thank you for that. Going back to number 14, Sing Redeeming Love. Now, this is kind of really Book of Mormon-y, you know what I mean? It also kind of sounds sort of folkish in the USA back in the folk days of saying things like this, Sing Redeeming Love. Well, it's in the Book of Mormon. It's not in the Bible. It's in Alma 5. They did Sing Redeeming Love, Alma 26 as well. They are brought to sing redeeming love. So you see this 3-word, and none of these are of, and none of these are the. All 3 of them are substantive words, right, Bill?
Yes. By the way, yes, all 3 are substantial words. And I'll just note, this would be a hard one to, like, whatever the Nephite Lamanite author is saying in Alma here, whatever Alma's saying, it has to be singing a song of redemption and love, right? Like the words obviously would be in Nephite language, but it would have to be something along the same phrase. Sing redeeming love, which is strange. Anyway, that would be a hard one, I think, to apply a loose translation model to and say, no, it was probably something else.
Here's the thing, Bill. I had always taken this non-literally, right? They're not actually out singing redeeming love, but it's, this expression of joy, this feeling, right, that is likened unto it. Actually, it means sing redeeming love because this shows up. This is the last line of a hymn. Okay. So it's in a hymn, it's sung. It actually is talking about singing redeeming love, literally. That's what I find out. So let's go ahead. We'll take this off. And we'll put sing redeeming love. Village Hymns for Social Worship, 1827. Asahel Nettleton. Let's see what this looks like. Oh my gosh, here's a hymn. It's called Herein Is Love. It's hymn 382 in this book. Ye saints, assist me in my song. Let all your passions move. To Jesus all the notes belong. I sing redeeming love. Any thoughts about that, Bill?
Yeah, it seems like a unique one. And just to go along with that, the peak of this was 1825, 1826, 1827. It is unheard of until 1797, 1798, 1805. And then it sort of ends its peak around the 1870s and then never to be heard again. So there's this blip of history where this phrase is used, and it just so happens to show up as the Nephites and Lamanites expressing, Alma here expressing his joy of the situation turning out well for them.
I think this is a pretty good hit. What do you think?
I think so. I think this would be one in the bucket of 19th century material.
Yeah, let me go here and just to show you that this isn't the only one. It was a popular hymn, at least in terms of showing up in different places. In 1812, we have another collection of hymns by William Bingo Collier. It's almost bongo, isn't it? So this is the same hymn in a different collection. Okay, so a certain degree of popularity of the hymn.
Would Joseph Smith have sung this song? Probably. Again, this was a young man who was so interested in religion that he went to the campfire meetings. He went to various churches. He wanted to know which church was true. Surely he sung hymns from multiple Christian denominations and almost certainly came across this song.
Yes, he did. And Don't Call Me Shirley. This one's from a poem by Joseph Swain, Redemption. I can't see you, Belle. I hope you're smiling at least. Redemption, a poem in 5 books. Okay, 1819. This is a different usage, okay? This is not a hymn. This is a poem. I think it might be a hymn, but it's a different one. It says, "My harp for these I string in humble hope, to aid their gratitude below the stars, below to aid them, and with them on high eternally to sing redeeming love." So there's another example of its usage. And here is a medley of joy and grief from 1822, and I think this is a different usage yet. Yes. "Grant each may rise to sing redeeming love in the bright realms of bliss and joy above." So same expression, different poem. 1822. And here's another one from 1822, a collection of sacred hymns. Sing Redeeming Love. 1826, Sing Redeeming Love, another collection of hymns. Spiritual Songs for Heaven, it's there too. And that was 1811. 1817, it's in another collection of hymns. The Sailor's Magazine. It even made it into the Sailor's Magazine in 1829. Sing Redeeming Love and Grace. And this is a different usage, I think. So this is a very popular expression. Yeah, look, there through eternity to sing redeeming love and grace, and in the realms of glory see our Heavenly Father's face. That's a different poem again. So very, very extensively used. It was definitely in the common vernacular in Joseph Smith's day, and it shows up in the Book of Mormon. And as you said, very popular during that time period, and pretty much just during the time period.
It was dead before and dead after, only then.
Okay, so let's go back to here. I was going to put this one up. That was Sing Redeeming Love. 15 is A Bright Recollection. Remember that, a bright recollection of all our guilt. Alma talks about that in Alma chapter 11, verse 43. It could be Amulek, I'm not sure at this point, but it's in Alma 11:43. It says, "Knowing even as we know now and have a bright recollection of all our guilt," that's if we don't repent while we're in this mortal body, right? So, a bright recollection. Let's see about that one.
Its usage is interesting. Again, I haven't seen your results.
Yeah.
So I knew what words we were going to search for tonight, but I hadn't plugged them in. A
Yes.
bright recollection seems interesting to me in
Yes.
how it's used in this way.
Mhm.
And I'm really curious to see if we find religious sources from the 1820s or slightly earlier that use it in this way.
Okay, this is Grenville Fletcher's 1824. It says, "A bright recollection remains of thee." So the sacred flame which my heart enshrineth, it's a love poem, but it's the expression about a bright recollection. This is the same one. This is the same one, same poem, same poem. This is the London Magazine, 1822. This looks secular too. The list, to be sure, is a bright recollection, and though we never saw a one of them, we feel from the famous sounding of their names that they were no common folk. Yeah, that one's secular. Gospel Advocate, 1824. This is probably not going to be secular. No one can have such repentance except he possess a bright recollection of all he has done,
Used the same way.
and a perfect knowledge of all he will do. We certainly find people doing wrong after they profess to have repented. Boom.
Yeah.
A bright recollection of all he has done. And that means all they have done wrong in context. That's why I read the second sentence. I think that's a bullseye.
Yeah. And that's not even a Texas sharpshooter kind.
This is 1824. So definitely Gospel Advocate, Volume 1, page 174. What does your graph say about this, Bill?
Yeah. So it shows that the conversation, again, zero. This is just not a phrase that is ever used until we get to 1821, 1822, peaks around 1863, and then sort of dies down. But it enters the scene in the early 1820s. It is a unique phrase, not found before that. And Joseph Smith has the Book of Mormon characters using it in the same way that the theological discussions of Joseph Smith's day are using it.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So let's go to the next one here. This is number 16. I'm glad I gave them numbers. Otherwise, we'd have no idea where we were. Both temporally and spiritually. That is a real Book of Mormon expression. And we know it from 1 Nephi 14:7. Which I'm not going to read the whole of, talks about, and also into destruction, both temporally and spiritually, according to the captivity of the devil of which I have spoken. So, and many other instances it gets used in the Book of Mormon, very common in the Book of Mormon, both temporally and spiritually, which is why it strikes me as so Book of Mormon-y. Let's put that in to the Google book search. So both temporally and spiritually. And here we go. Let me go back here. Both temporally and spiritually, and it shows up 1642. Wow. An assertion for true and Christian church. William Stoughton, professor of civil law. What does he say? To this we answer that it is not against reason that one man for one fault should be punished both temporally and spiritually. That's exactly how it was used in the Book of Mormon. Talking about being punished both temporally and spiritually. Let me double check that, okay? Okay. For the time cometh, saith the Lamb of God, that I will work a great and a marvelous work among the children of men, a work that shall be everlasting, either on the one hand or on the other, either to the convincing of them unto peace and life eternal, or unto the deliverance of them to the hardness of their hearts and the blindness of their minds, unto their being brought down into captivity. This is the punishment. And also into destruction, both temporally and spiritually, according to the captivity of the devil of which I have spoken. It is the same phrase being used in exactly that same way to describe the destruction or the punishment that the wicked receive. So if I take that off the screen, put this back up again, I think we can see that here. To this we answer that it is not against reason that one man for one fault should be punished, both temporally and spiritually, period.
Yeah, the parts of the body and of the soul, in both parts he hath offended.
Mm-hmm.
It's using it in the exact same way that Mormonism uses these phrases.
Interesting. So that was from 1642. We've got the Christian Herald and Seaman's, otherwise known as Seaman's, magazine. That's from 1823. Let's see what that says. In this persuasion, we have strongly advocated the sailor's dangers, both temporally and spiritually. Okay, so this is, it's like more secular, but obviously how secular can it be when you're talking about spiritually? But it is talking about sailors. This is from 1817, the Theological and Miscellaneous Works of Joseph Priestley. he talks about, and I'm not able to navigate away from this, so I can't read any further up. It talks about something ordered him to resign Sicily to King Charles. So this will be secular, or he would proceed against him both temporally and spiritually. The Christian Remembrancer from 1824 talks about both temporally and spiritually. Please that providence which gives and takes away for reasons equally wise to deny to his flock the longer continuance of services with which both temporally and spiritually were. Okay. So I think the most interesting one of that was the very first one, though it was 1642, same phrase, same usage as the Book of Mormon. Your thoughts, Bill?
This is another interesting one. It's not used at all before 1800, and you end up in 1824 to 1835. It peaks out at 1851, but this phrase does not start to get used until the early 1800s. There's a little blip back in 1676, but otherwise it's just zero.
It's amazing. Can I ask you a question, Bill?
Please.
Where else are you going to find this kind of stuff on the internet, the entire internet? There's only one place you're going to find this kind of in-depth deconstruction analysis of the text of the Book of Mormon, of LDS history, of current events, and that's here on Mormonism Live and other podcasts associated with the Mormon Discussions podcast group. Go ahead.
Yeah, you've spent time in the last few years. I mean, again, you went through the Book of Mormon and we're talking about the Mosiah priority in the first 116 pages, and the idea that in the beginning that there was this reference to the kings was, I think, in what Nephi refers to, right? Or was that what the Mosiah priority referred to? And then the author of the Book of Mormon gets away from using those. Does this ring a bell, by the way?
Yes, there are many signs of the Mosiah priority theory.
Yeah. And we get a little blip of the 116 pages that makes its way into the current Book of Mormon. And I think it might be the Words of Mormon or something, but it's in the transition pages that there's maybe the last page of the 116 pages becomes part of our modern day Book of Mormon. And you've done such great research into the Book of Mormon around these kinds of things. I think back of the episode we did on the 116 pages, which I thought was great. I really do think that we do a great job of doing deep dives into Mormon scholarship, Mormon history, and current events too, for that matter. And the work that we do here, I think, is more in depth than what you find Noah Barnes doing. Certainly Ward Radio, and I see so many times even the apologists that have some degree of respect, let's say Brian Hales, for instance, to the believers, rarely do they put up on the screen the things that contradict what they're saying, or they disagrees with what they're saying. And even just tonight, there are moments where you and I acknowledge that, this is not a good example, or this is weak, right. Or you started off this conversation saying, hey, look, there was 10 or 15% of these terms that that don't work for this. They don't show up. It's not a good example.
It may have been up to 33.
Yeah. And so I'm just noting that in order to go into Mormonism, you have to sort of call balls and strikes fairly. And you have to acknowledge where things work and where they don't. And you have to help the audience, believers or people deconstructing. You have to help them have all the information to be able to make the decisions about how they're going to live out their lives in or out of Mormonism. And I think we've done a hell of a good job over the last decade, putting stuff up on the screen, explaining things in depth, and trying to show people the full picture so that they can make an informed decision about what they do with their lives.
Yeah, we're just trying to call it, like you say, balls and strikes, and be as fair as possible in the analysis, because this isn't something where I have any desire to do anything except find out what really happened at this point. I've been fed a story for decades, and believe me, I've had enough of that. And I think we all have. So we just put out the information. You decide, and we dig it up and put it out there as good as anybody else does on the internet, I think, which was me leading into, please hit like, please hit subscribe. Okay. And if you haven't already, and if you haven't done it recently, if you're not doing it currently, please go to Mormonism Live Help me, Bill.
Mormonism
.org.
Live.
.com.
Yeah, you can go to mormonismlive.org. So
Org.
mormonismlive.org. And in the header bar at the very top of the website, you'll see a donate button. It takes you right to the donor box platform. You just put in $5 or $10 a month. It's such a small thing for you, but when 10 of you do it, when 100 of you do it, it is such a big thing for us. I'd love, if we had some goal, if tonight just 10 of you would set up for the first time a recurring donation of $5 a month or $10 a month. Donations have dropped off a tiny bit. Now, we're able to do what we do here, and RFM and I do this full time. So folks, if you do enjoy this work, if you like hearing this kind of scholarship, the dives we do into history, next week we're going to be talking about, oh my goodness, my mind just went blank, but
the Zion's Camp, I believe.
Zion's Camp, yes, sorry. So we're going to go into detail about Zion's Camp. It'll be a great historical episode. Tonight, I think we're really digging into showing that the phrases of the Book of Mormon, really just the hot spot is those 1820s. So folks, if you want to just say a really little thank you, sign up to be a recurring donor, $5 or $10 a month, mormonismlive.org, click the donate button, be part of the team and join the team today.
Yes, we accept little thank yous, we accept big thank yous, and we just say thank you. All right, so here we go. We're on the home stretch. We are up to number 16. So 5 left to go. Oh, we did that one, didn't we? So let's go to the next one, which is number 17, the demands of divine justice. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 5. It's 5 words, but why don't you go ahead and make the comment about this that you made before the show started, Bill?
You'll have to remind me. Let's see here.
That really it's 4 words, because how do you say demands of divine justice without saying the in front of it?
Yeah. The on the front of this is sort of useless. Just demands of divine justice would be sufficient.
Mhm.
I would have a hard time, though, thinking of a place where you could say demands of divine justice without a the in the front of it.
You can't say it with a. It's not going to work. A demands of divine justice. No. Okay. So it's demands of divine justice. You can put a the in front. I still think it's significant. It's very Book of Mormon-y and not Bible-y. Here's Mosiah 2, verse 38, where it occurs in Benjamin's speech, talking about, therefore, if that man repenteth not and remaineth and dieth an enemy to God, the demands of divine justice to awaken his immortal soul to a lively sense of his own guilt. You could say he even has a bright recollection of it. But let's go ahead and put the demands of justice in the Google advanced search, which I'm going to do. Let's see. I'll put all 5 words in there. Do we have it on the screen, Bill?
We do.
Thank you very much. The demands of divine justice. Oh, we got it. The Religious Monitor and Evangelical Repository from 1827 has that entire expression. Let's see what the heck that says, okay? It says, yet it is impossible for any collision to arise between his perfections, must be talking about God, much less in the same perfection, yet such a collision is represented as occurring between the demands of divine justice according to the views of our brethren. This is talking about what justice will do and what justice won't, okay? This is talking about a collision occurring, or at least being alleged to be occurring in another person's argument about between the demands of divine justice and something else. And I bet that has to do with mercy. If we go further into it, yeah, I'll bet it is. But there's the expression, the demands of divine justice, being used in a similar way in 1827. What do you think about that, Bill?
Yeah, this actually peaks at 1824. Again, 1700 and further back, unheard of. Today, very rarely used. And I would have a hunch that some of those results are because of Mormonism, but it really gets moving in like the late 1700s and peaks out at 1824. Demands of divine justice. Right in the moment where Joseph, if Joseph's the author, Joseph, by the way, so many of the examples that you've looked up tonight have been 1822, 1823, 1824, 1825, 1826, 1827. That bucket of years, I think, absorbs by far the majority of these instances. And I'll just note that that's the very moment where Joseph Smith is telling everybody he's about to get the plates. He's if he's the author, he's thinking deeply about how he's going to pull this off, how he's going to carry this book out, and he would be looking around in that very moment for the conversations happening around religion in his hopes to resolve those with his work of fiction.
Let me go ahead and show here, though I'm not going to read anymore from this. That was the 1827 use of the demands of divine justice. The same expression shows up in 1805 in a pamphlet by Thomas Robinson, the demands of divine justice in a religious context. The Christian Observer, 1826, talks about the demands of divine justice in a religious context. The Country Magazine or Fireside Companion from 1817 mentions the demands of divine justice, and that's also in a very religious context. And even in some commentary, in an 1827 commentary called the Holy Bible, Genesis to Judges, it mentions the demands of divine justice. Interesting. Okay, very, very common phrase at the time, apparently not so much anymore. We'll remove that from the screen. That was demands of divine justice. Now we get to number 18, awful state of wickedness. It's Ether 4, verse 15. Awful state of wickedness, where it's mentioned there, behold, when ye shall rend that veil of unbelief, which doth cause you to remain in your awful state of wickedness and hardness of heart, etc. Let's see what happens. Awful state of wickedness, if we put that into the Google book search. Awful state of wickedness. Oh, 1811, funeral sermon. This is of Reverend Eleazar Stores, who apparently was a pastor. It's talked about an awful state of wickedness. And the longer it continues, the worse it would grow, were it not for the displays of sovereign grace. So talking about the pains of hell. Yes. And this is the one. So this is the only one that occurs, okay? But it is 1811. As long as it's the only one, let's go ahead and see it in its context. The world is in an awful state of wickedness, and the longer it continues, the worse it would grow, were it not for the displays of sovereign grace. So it's not talking specifically about hell. This is the benefit of looking at it in context. I understand. It's talking about the awful state of wickedness of the world, okay? And so when we look at what it was, the awful state of wickedness. Well, it's not talking about the damnation of hell here either, is it? It's talking about the wickedness that mortals are in while they're in the world, which makes it more similar to the other usage. Your thoughts?
I love the comment there. It sure feels like happiness.
You're being deceived, KD. Don't be deceived. Wickedness never was happiness. And I can tell from your smile that you're engaged in wickedness.
Not used at all until we get to the early 1800s. Now, it sort of peaks long after Mormonism, again, 1837, but sort of that 1809, 1810, 1811, it gets used a little bit, then used again in the 1830s, 1840s. That, again, might be due to Mormonism, and then gets some use going forward, but nothing in the past. So, again, you have to believe it's not used, but then we get back to the days of Nephi and Lehi, and suddenly there's another peak there, which is a strange thing to think of.
Mm-hmm. Yes. All right. So we'll take that one off the stage, and we'll put that one up. Great. That was awful state of wickedness. We've got two more to go. Number 19. One eternal round. This is a wonderful phrase. It's found in the Book of Mormon. It's not found in the Bible. It is very Book of Mormon-y. And it occurs 3 times, at least. I think it's these 3 times, though. In the Book of Mormon, 1 Nephi 10:19, Alma 7:20, and Alma 37:12. So very far apart, each one from the other. And you can see where it talks about the course of the Lord is one eternal round. And that's what it's talking about each time. Therefore, his course is one eternal round is the second one in Alma 7. And in Alma 37, it says, and his course is one eternal round. So all being used very similarly by different speakers, at least as far as the Book of Mormon presents them as different speakers, but being used in a similar manner as we've seen in other instances before. One eternal round, what happens when we put that into? Let's see what happens, okay? One eternal round. Surely that is unique to the Book of Mormon. Like infinite atonement, right, Bill? One eternal round. Here we go. Oh, shoot. Yeah, it looks like it's not unique to the Book of Mormon. It doesn't look like it first was mentioned in the Book of Mormon even. We've got the Evangelical Magazine, Volume 10, page 511 from 1802, which talks about one eternal round. What does it say? Oh, this also looks like the last line of it's either a poem or a hymn. Of course, a hymn is a poem set to words. So a poem. And this is it's under poetry. It's a poem titled, The Wheel is Going Round. So that makes sense. The course of the Lord is one eternal round. The wheel is going round. The varying dispensations of providence. Talking about the different dispensations. That sounds Mormon-y too. So it's the wheel of fortune. And the last part says, where, free from sin and pain and woe, unmingled joys and pleasures flow in one eternal round. When was that? 1802. Predates the Book of Mormon by 28 years. Here's one from 1810. The works of the Reverend and Learned Isaac Watts. Is this going to be the same one? I'm not sure. Actually, it's a different hymn. This is a hymn. It's not the same poem. It's the same expression that ends a different poem. Hosanna, let the earth and skies repeat the joyful sound. Rocks, hills, and vales reflect the voice in one eternal round. This is another expression that appears to have been popular in Joseph Smith's day and immediately prior to his writing the Book of Mormon, or at least producing it. Here's the Christian Spectator, 1828, Bill. It cannot be duty for him to hold himself the complete slave of one eternal round of artificial duty. By the way, this article in 1828 is quoting something. It doesn't say what it's quoting, but it shows it's quoting something by quotation marks, and one eternal round is within those quotation marks. So whoever's writing this in 1828 is quoting somebody else who has used that expression before them, thus adding to the fact that it is something that is in common usage in the 1820s. What does your research show on this, Bill?
Well, first I want to say some new recurring donors came in, and I just want to say to Wayne and to Sharon, thank you to both of you.
Thank you so much.
Be like Wayne, be like Sharon, become a donor today. I'll keep checking the emails, and if you folks will sign up to be a recurring donor, I'll come back on here over the course of the rest of the show to just say thank you. But Sharon and Wayne, thank you very much. It looks like this shows up. I'm going to take that one off the screen, but this, oops.
Yeah, one eternal round.
Yeah, one eternal round shows up in the early 1700s. Again, zero before that. Then suddenly this phrase starts to be used in the early 1700s, peaks out at 1778, and then has this sort of slow burn down, but certainly during the 1820s is still pretty heavily used.
Very, very interesting. Thank you for that. You know, I remember over on the Discuss Mormonism board, I think that's what it's called now. This has been 15, 20 years ago. And this fact was being commented on, that one eternal round is not unique to the Book of Mormon. And I remember, I'm pretty sure my memory's accurate here, but I believe it was Paul Osborne, who is the fellow who discovered the Anubis chiseled off jaw on the lead plate that was used for facsimile 3. You want to describe that a little bit more, Bill? I'm not sure I'm doing a good job of it.
Yeah. So when it came to, was it facsimile 3 you said?
Yes.
So facsimile 3 has, the original would have had Anubis on there. Anubis has a snout. And when the metal plate was made, in order to be able to print facsimile 3 into documents, including in the scriptures, you can tell that there is where the snout would be, there is a carve out so that that snout has been removed, as well as one of the ears of Anubis also. So then it ends up being sort of a funny looking face. Joseph ends up translating it into being a slave, and it ends up having one ear sort of sticking right out of the top of his head, which is, it's weird looking. But when you recognize, like, oh, that would have been Anubis, the snout's been removed, the ear's been removed. Joseph Smith would have done this because when he looked at facsimile 1, he would have noticed that Anubis there, who is also just in part, has same features as this character in facsimile 3. And Smith, because he's attributing different labels to who those people are, he would not want the reader to see the overlap of the similarities, and hence it appears as though he altered the print plate of facsimile 3 in order to hide that that was Anubis.
Yeah, I mean, what am I going to do with a dog? I got an idea for Abraham sitting upon Pharaoh's throne and teaching the principles of astronomy, like we read about in Josephus once again. So I can make that work. But what the heck is a dog doing there? I mean, if the dog is sitting there doing tricks, it's okay. But here's a dog who's like leading somebody in, and that's not going to work. I've got to make a human head out of this. With a really bad cowlick is what it looks like.
And Robert Rittner shows that on the document, there is a section of the text above and below the characters is Egyptian hieroglyphics. And Robert Rittner shows how a section of those hieroglyphics point to the fact that that was Anubis.
Yes, very much so. So hang on a second here. Yeah.
We did a whole episode on it, by the way, folks. So if you're one that doesn't tune in to see every episode and you missed the episode on the snout of Anubis, we did that episode maybe about a year ago or so.
Yes, it just occurred to me that what it was that you know that character in Figure 3 looks like Ed Grimley. Do you remember Ed Grimley?
You don't say.
You do. Ed Grimley with the cowlick. That's who that is. It's Ed Grimley. Martin Short is in facsimile 3. All right, now I think that we're ready to go. Are we ready for the last one? That was One Eternal Round. By the way, the reason I brought that up was because Paul Osborne, even though he is so far away from the church and he's so mad at the church for everything he's had to endure at the hands of the church, and he wasn't over it yet at the time. I don't know if he is yet. I hope he is. But even in his state of extreme disbelief and antagonism toward the church, he expressed how disappointed he was that, like, the one freaking expression that he thought was unique to the Book of Mormon and was nice and poetic, it still wasn't original. When he found that out, he vented some spleen. Okay, let's go to number 20. This is not on the list. I didn't see it on the list because it has 6 words in it. I came up with this one myself. Okay, you ready? I also came up with one of these others, but I can't remember which one. But the other 18 are from the list that was provided by that article. Here's number 20. God would cease to be God. I thought you can't get too much more Book of Mormon-y than that, and less Bible-y. Then God would cease to be God. It occurs 3 times in the Book of Mormon. Alma 42, all of them in Alma 42 though, right? In verse 13, God would cease to be God. It says, now the work of justice could not be destroyed. If so, God would cease to be God. Verse 22, so that was 13. Verse 22 now. If not so, the works of justice would be destroyed and God would cease to be God. And if that looks like what he said in verse 13, that's because it's not because he's repeating the same idea. It's because of chiasmus, damn it. And the third example is in the same chapter, verse 25. What do you suppose that mercy can rob justice? I say unto you, nay, not one whit. If so, God would cease to be God. All right. So put God would cease to be God in the Google Advanced Book. Are you kidding me? No, that's not going to work. Let me put it up here on the screen. And let's try this Hail Mary. What is it? God? Yeah, there it is. God would, I'll put a capital. I don't think I need to, but God would cease to be God. Here's the phrase. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All 6 letters in the phrase. Rut-row raggy. It looks like we have something.
Will you make that? I was gonna say, make that a little bigger. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to make it a lot bigger. 1825. The whole works of the late Reverend John Lightfoot.
Again,
284. What?
1822 to 1827 is the window where we see the most of these phrases showing up in religious theological discussions. At the very time, Moroni keeps telling Joseph, no, not this year, next year. No, not this year, next year. Huh.
Oh yeah, Moroni is like one of those angels that always points like at your tie, and then you look down and he does that to your nose. He's just a trickster. He's always doing that. I was just kidding. Next year, really. Okay, so that's it. It's the whole works of the late Reverend John Lightfoot, 1825. Let's see what it looks like. Here it is from his sermons. 1825. It's published. There is nothing can dissolve the bond of man's obedience to his Creator, unless God would cease to be God. Or if God be God, serve him. So the only way that you would not be bound to be obedient to the Creator, to God, is if he would cease to be God. Only then would you not be bound to be obedient to him. So it is not exactly used in the exact same way, I would not say, but it is the exact same expression and used with the same kind of meaning about God would cease to be God. It doesn't say if, what is it? The Book of Mormon says the works of justice being destroyed. Let me go back to this. It's helpful to review that. Now, the work of justice could not be destroyed. If so, God would cease to be God. So in other words, if mercy robbed justice is basically what he's saying, then God would cease to be God. The works of justice. Okay. And the law inflicteth the punishment. So if the law does not inflict the punishment, then God would cease to be God. So it's not based upon our obedience. It's based upon punishment. That if justice doesn't happen, then God ceases to be God in the Book of Mormon. But the same expression, and an unusual expression, I would say. Let me see here if I can just put this back up on the screen. I'll take this down. I think this is the only example that comes up. This is John Lightfoot again. So this is basically the same thing, but it's from 1822. It's a publication in 1822. So there's 2 sources in which the same quote is published, which has God would cease to be God. By John Lightfoot, Doctor of Divinity, 1822 and 1825. Your thoughts on number 20, Bill?
Yeah, so it looks like it's that John Lightfoot, because he dies in the 1600, late 1600s, 1685, I think. And 1710, 1711, there's a usage of that phrase, quite popular, and then it just dies off again. And then there's a resurgence, 1777. It stays sort of, up and down, but I'll just note there's been a resurgence of this being said starting in about maybe 1989, 1990, to the point where now today we say this more than we used to. But you go back in time prior to 1700 when that little blip, it's not said at all. And then I've got one other thing I wanted to just share with the audience.
Yeah.
And this I thought was interesting. Again, it struck me today when we were talking on the phone and you looked a couple of them up and, you were like, 1822, 1824, 1826. And it strikes me again how interesting it is that many of these religious conversations around these phrases are happening at the very moment that Moroni keeps putting Joseph Smith off for a year. And so I just made a note here. One possible coinciding Book of Mormon phrases that show up in the 1820s. There's something missing there.
One possible explanation for coinciding Book of Mormon phrases.
Gotta be. Yep. One possible explanation for the coinciding Book of Mormon phrases is that Joseph Smith is immersing himself in the religious language of his own day during the years of the coming forth of the plates when they were repeatedly postponed. So I noted to you when we were having a conversation, when we're believing Mormons, the church gives us a narrative about the 116 pages, for instance. It gives us a narrative about the Book of Abraham. And we don't have the ability, when we're all in believers, to step back and to see what would be the perspective if the church wasn't true. And when we look at 1823, when Joseph first meets Moroni, all the way up to 1827 when he gets the plates, if the church isn't true, then it's not Moroni who keeps postponing things, it's Joseph Smith himself. So you have to go, whatever the reasons are, if the church isn't true, Joseph Smith has a reason why each year he tells people he's going to bring the plates home and then has to inform people that Moroni has kicked the can down the street. So from a skeptical perspective, every delay between Moroni's initial visit in 1823 and the eventual retrieval of the plates in 27 is enacted by Smith himself, affording Smith additional time to absorb the vocabulary, the rhetoric, the doctrinal conversation circulating in the burned over district. In other words, whatever the reason is, he's telling you he's not ready yet. And what might he feel he needs more of in order to be ready to actually put words on paper to create the Book of Mormon? Now, one option is that he needs that time to fabricate the object, the plates made out of tin. But another thing is that he needs to take in the information that will allow him to be the author of the Book of Mormon. Now, this possibility I thought was made more interesting. I made a note to RFM today in our conversation. I said, don't you remember in the 1826 Glasslicker trial that Joseph said he went to school? He's an adult by this point, by the way, 19, almost 20 years old, I think. The possibility is made more interesting by Joseph Smith's own reported testimony during the 1826 Bainbridge examination, where he stated that while living much of the time with Josiah Stoll, he had been employed on Stoll's farm and going to school. At approximately 20 years old, Smith was clearly not referring to a conventional childhood education, but in rural New York, adults could and sometimes did attend seasonal district schools during the winter months when agricultural work slowed. Even a modest education would have exposed him to reading, writing, reciting things, religious text, while placing him in an environment where biblical language and Protestant theology were regularly discussed. And so rather than reflecting an ancient Hebrew record translated into English, many of its distinctive phrases may reflect the vocabulary and theological discourse that Joseph Smith encountered by attending whatever this school was, listening to sermons, reading contemporary religious literature, and participating in the vibrant revival culture of Western New York. I'll just note too, if we remember Willard Chase's account, I think it's in maybe it's that Dr. Weil book, W-Y-L, but Willard Chase informs the reader that Joseph Smith had already been to Josiah Stoll's location. He had met Emma Hale. He comes home. He then gets Samuel Lawrence to take him back to Emma and to Josiah Stoll. And so he had been in the area twice. Now, he does that during these years. Again, 1822 to 1826, 27. So he leaves his home. He leaves the people that he interacted with, the treasure diggers from Palmyra. He gets out of town on multiple occasions. What a great opportunity away from home to take in information where nobody back in Palmyra will be able to keep eyes on you, will know what you're doing. And Joseph Smith himself says that he went to school. What all did that involve? We don't know. But I don't think we should take for granted those 4 or 5 years from 22 to 27. where Smith keeps saying he's going to have gold plates, but keeps postponing it 1 year at a time, because those years were important to him, that he needed that time to get ready. And strangely enough, it's at the very moment where all of these theological discussions are primarily happening during.
Right. And to the extent this is reported correctly and understood literally, which I don't see any reason to doubt either at this point, what we have is a picture of Joseph Smith that's different than the picture that the church and the apologists try to portray, which was basically of a dunce who only had a third grade education, no real interest in reading or anything. In other words, you have to make him as dumb as possible and make the Book of Mormon as amazing as possible in order to fit God in between. That's the gap where you got to fit God, right? The God of the gaps. So, what this indicates to me is a Joseph Smith who was wanting to learn things, who was inquisitive and curious and wanted to learn things and went to school. When he's 19, he doesn't have to go to school. And if he doesn't have to go to school and he's going to school, it's because he wants to go to school. That's because he wants to learn things, I would imagine, because that's what school is all about, is a general proposition. He is somebody who's very, very interested in learning. And this could have been his inspiration, if indeed this happened, as you say, during the winter for adults, for the School of the Prophets that he instituted in the 1830s, the mid 1830s in Kirtland, which was basically, I think, for the men, but the adult men during winter when work was a little bit slacker and time could be devoted to learning things.
Yeah. Joseph is intentionally taking on more education when he doesn't have to. One can only imagine what his motivations and interests are for doing that, but it's something, and it coincides at the same moment that he's intentionally giving a story to the public, a public facing story that is entirely designed to give himself more time to get ready for this project.
Yes, and when I saw this, when you pointed this out to me, we've been over this before. I didn't see the school part. You pointed it out, and I went, "Oh my gosh, that could be really important." And I sent a copy of it to Randall Bell today, and he got it. And believe me, he's excited about it too, because he's very much trying to um, challenge the church proposal and the apologist portrayal of Joseph Smith as the ignorant dunce.
Yeah. And one other thing, I just want to say thank you to Marcy. So another new recurring donation came in from Marcy. And so thank you, Marcy, for that.
Thank you. Wow, this is great. So that's it, right? Let's see, is there anything else that we have to talk about here, Bill? We talked about God would cease to be God, which was a hit. There's your slide. There's the last 116 pages, which you talked about before, correctly?
We did
Correct?
that. Yep, we did that. We did the slide after this one.
And this one too. Okay, great. Oh, here's the summary, right? I did a summary of all 20. So these are the expressions in the Book of Mormon that are found in publications prior to 1830 that are not found in the King James Version of the Bible. Demands of justice, priestcraft, infinite atonement, high priesthood, probationary state, punishment affixed, preparatory state, plain and precious, bowels of mercy, plan of happiness, points of doctrine, plan of restoration, racked with torment, sing redeeming love, a bright recollection, both temporally and spiritually, the demands of divine justice, awful state of wickedness, one eternal round, and number 20, God would cease to be God. All of them found in the Book of Mormon and in literature prior to 1830, but not in the King James Version of the Bible. What do you make of this, Bill? Your final words on this, and then I'll take us home.
If you start off going, this has to be a tight translation model. Again, D&C 10 has God himself saying it's a tight translation. Then you've got the very people, Emma Smith, Martin Harris, David Whitmer, who were in the room as the translation is occurring, and they all have a consistent story telling you that this is a tight translation. If it is, this would be a huge contradiction to that working, And you would essentially have Joseph Smith being allowed to choose the words from the prominent theological discussions of his day, when it's supposed to be God telling Joseph Smith what's on the plates, because Joseph can't read the plates. All he can do is bury his face into a hat and wait for God to tell him what to write. A loose translation model doesn't even make sense at the rate at which Joseph is translating. In other words, imagine a world where Joseph buries his face in a hat and God says, yeah, tell him a story about something and use your own language. And then Joseph recounts 20 words at a time and reads it back to that makes no sense. The faithful story, when you take the facts for what they are, only makes sense if it's a tight translation. Joseph buries his face in the hat. God says there's symbols on the plates. You don't know those. I'm just going to tell you. And it came to pass that and he's going to continue on that way. But what you have Joseph actually putting in as the Book of Mormon is the discussions of the 1820s in religion that he wants to solve all the problems of. It's one more definitive moment where the church and its claims don't hold up, and it looks quite obvious to those of us who are willing to think reasonably about it that the Book of Mormon is just a 19th century product. And then you have Richard Bushman, a faithful, believing scholar, say, yeah, like I want to believe, but you're right, it's a 19th century product.
Yeah, and something else we have to weigh in this calculus is a couple of stories that we're all familiar with. But the first one has to do with Joseph Smith spelling out names like Coriantumr, T-U-M-R, Coriantumr. That doesn't work in English, M-R. So he has to spell it out, which means that if the faithful story is correct, he can see how the word is spelled. That's how tight the translation is. The other thing about this idea about Joseph Smith just sort of saying what Joseph Smith would say and what he knows is that we have another story, and I think it's from Emma Smith, about getting to the part in the Book of Mormon where it talks about Jerusalem being a walled city, having a wall around Jerusalem. And I think it's Emma who says that Joseph stopped and said, Joseph's the one who's dictating it, right? This is how it's presented. He's dictating. He says the line about that there's a wall around Jerusalem. He looks up and says, Emma, is there a wall around Jerusalem? She says, well, yes, there is. And he says, good, because I thought I was deceived. That story suggests that Joseph Smith is not writing or not dictating what it is he thinks. He is being directed to dictate things that even he thinks are wrong, not just what he thinks is correct. So I think that story also indicates that this is a very tight translation, and Joseph Smith is supposed to dictate exactly what he sees, regardless of whether he agrees with it or believes it to be true.
Yeah. It's what he's doing in every other place. The Adamic language is a tight translation. The Book of Abraham with the Kirtland Egyptian papers is a tight translation. This symbol means this paragraph of words. I don't know how you get around it. Again, the only reason we have a loose translation is because we need a loose translation, because a tight translation shows that the church isn't what it claims to be. And I think believers just have to face the data, just as Richard Bushman did, and acknowledge that the Book of Mormon is a 19th century product.
Horses require a loose translation. Chiasmus requires a tight translation.
But even in animals, right? Like horses requires loose, but what about a curlam or a cunam? Like that sounds like some word from some other language. That doesn't make any sense. That only works if that's a tight translation, because they don't know what the hell that is.
Right. If it wasn't a horse, which it couldn't have been because horses didn't exist when they're being talked about in the Book of Mormon, and it's some animal that Joseph Smith didn't know what it was, like a tapir, then why wouldn't he simply translate the Nephite word for tapir, which would be Kurilam or Kuman or something, Kumum or something else foreign? Yeah, that's a great point, Bill. It doesn't work. these things only work if you're only willing to take one step, one chess move, and not think 2 or 3 chess moves beyond it, where it runs into a brick wall and your knight explodes into flames every time. Okay, so is that all that you had to say? And I'll take us home. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real treat. We're at 2 hours and 44 minutes. It's been a long evening, but I think this is important. I think what we have established, and what I would argue that we have established, is that not only in the prior episode did we prove and continue to prove tonight that the Book of Mormon does answer, I think we're up to 36 or 37, all the main religious and even political disputes of Joseph Smith's day, but it did so using the same terms of art and unusual and sometimes unique words and phrases. Well, they weren't unique. That's the problem, right? They're unique to the Book of Mormon as opposed to the Bible, but they weren't unique to the 1820s, and thereby hangs the tale, and thereby hangs the conclusion, which I will make here. Once again, is that I believe that there has been no other book produced that is so obviously the result of its time and place, or the product of its time and place, as the Book of Mormon. And by time and place, I mean early 19th century United States of America, and specifically upstate New York. I think we've proven that beyond a reasonable doubt, although others may disagree. Let us know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you next week, next Wednesday at 6:00 p.m. Mountain Time for another exciting episode of Mormonism Live. Good night, everybody.